Hello, I'd like to call to order the City of Littleton City Council virtual regular meeting for Tuesday, May 19, 2020. It is 6:30. City Clerk, if we could have a roll call, please.
Mayor Valdez.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Malin.
Here.
Councilmember Driscoll.
Here.
Councilmember Elrod.
Here.
Councilmember Fay.
Here.
Councilmember Grove.
Here.
Councilmember Milliman.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you very much, Colleen. If we could please have the assistant to the city manager, Sam Fox, if you could please read how this meeting will be run.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council, staff, citizens, and guests. I'm Sam Fox, assistant to the city manager, and I'll be serving as the moderator for this evening's virtual council meeting. We are streaming this meeting on cable channel 8, Facebook, and on our website, littletongov.org. The agenda will be handled by Mayor Valdez in the same way it would be handled for a regular in-person meeting. As always, citizen participation is encouraged during public comment and public hearings. To participate via phone, please call 669-900-6833, and when prompted, enter the webinar ID 966-3557-4763. There will be two opportunities for citizen and public participation this evening, once during public comment and again during ordinances on second reading and public hearings. If you wish to speak during either of those opportunities, please call in early and stay on the line. Again, the number to call is 669-900-6833. And when prompted, the webinar ID is 966-3557-4763. When public comment or public hearing is announced, please press *9 to raise your hand and be recognized as a speaker. Microphones will be muted for all citizens calling in. Citizens can press *9 to raise their hand and be recognized. Speakers will have 3 minutes to address council. The city clerk will announce when you have 30 seconds remaining, and again when your time is up. We expect comments to be civil. Disrespectful or disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. For agenda items, Mayor Valdez will ask for a motion and a second, followed by discussion and a vote. Council will vote on agenda items using a thumbs up for a yes vote and a thumbs down for a no vote. The clerk will call each vote with all ayes and nays. Again, if you plan on participating during public comment or the public hearings, please call 669-900-6833. When prompted, enter webinar ID 966-3557-4763. Please stay on the line and press *9 to raise your hand to speak.
Great, thank you, Sam Fox. Vanna White has nothing over you. You do a great job. Thank you very much. All right, council, we are looking for the, are there any changes to the agenda? It's revision 1. You may have caught that. Revision 1. Do we have any changes? Tyler, all I see is Sam on the screen. Hearing no changes, the agenda is approved. If we can go ahead, we'll move on to the comments and reports. If we could have the city manager, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council. I have a couple of issues I'd like to brief the council on. I want to talk about our open air Main Street plan and kind of the status of that. I also want to start with, though, a press conference that our governor had yesterday, and I would like to defer to Reed Betzing, our city attorney, to kind of brief us, because that'll set the stage here for what follows on my report. So, Mayor, if you're okay, let's have Reed brief us.
Please.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As Mark indicated, the mayor issued a press conference or had a press conference yesterday where he talked about, among other things, testing, but for our purposes was the reopening of a lot of the restaurants that have not been able to have dine-in service. During that press conference yesterday, he stated that he would be issuing guidelines within the next couple of days. I actually just received them about 15 minutes ago. They're in a draft.
Reed, I have a question. You said mayor. I think, did you mean governor?
The governor, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I just received the proposed regulations to allow for restaurants to reopen. The thought would be to allow a few days for stakeholders, those restaurants who may want to weigh in, to provide their comments, and then with hope that restaurants would be allowed for dine-in service starting either on Monday or on Tuesday. So I can certainly get a draft of this out to our communications director, who can get that disseminated. Right now, it is going to allow for reduced seating. What that reduced seating is, we don't know just yet. That's going to be based upon the testing criteria that they come out with. And so they have not defined that. But generally, a lot of it is what you may think. Distancing between tables, so 8 feet is what the proposed distance is from patrons to patrons. No more than 6 persons in a particular table. Servers and restaurant staff wearing gloves and wearing masks, but it does allow for, to speak to Mark here, it does allow for outdoor seating. During his press conference on Monday, Governor Polis indicated that he was going to reduce the regulations as it relates to a lot of the liquor licensing requirements. And so, as council notes tonight, one of the items on council's list is to allow for the closure of Main Street, which will allow for some of our restaurants and retailers to be able to expand not only into the public right-of-way being the sidewalk, but also out onto Main Street itself. And so, Mark, I guess I'll turn it back to you to give a little bit more information on that, or if I need any more prompting, let me know.
All right, thank you, Reed. So this was rather exciting news. We weren't quite expecting it at this point in time, but we had been planning for something just like this. So first, let me go to the Main Street project here, and then I'm going to come back to the interim. So as the council is aware, I reported last week that we had made an application to Tri-County Health Department for open air seating in the closure of Main Street. And so we got back, I'd say, some pretty favorable comments. We still have a lot of work to kind of sort through, but staff immediately made contact with the merchants in the downtown area. And so we've been beginning the planning phase of that. So at this point, we've been working with the merchants, trying to understand exactly who was being committed to this thing over what period of time, and then obviously planning for the space. Our intent is to address all the questions from Tri-County Health and resubmit a more defined plan here as soon as possible. The logistics are pretty heavy at this point, but the intent, I think, is based on what we see so far and the feedback from the merchants, is probably looking at Friday the 29th might be the first day for which we'd have the open air seating on Main Street and its closure. So now, in the interim between now and that particular date, I think with the governor's order here, and apparently his intent to loosen up the liquor laws as well, we have been, as staff, been working on a process here that merchants, restaurants, bars, anybody actually could make an application to the city by extending their business out onto private property, out onto sidewalk. We actually are patterning this particular application after the announcement from the city and county of Denver today. So they were generous enough to kind of send their information. We've made contact, and a wonderful idea. So we are simply just borrowing their concept. And by the end of the week here, our intent is to actually have that application up on our webpage. And so we will be announcing that to all of the merchants. We've had a handful of requests for this already. So we believe that this is an opportunity for restaurants, bars, and our merchants to kind of extend out and be much more visible here certainly even before the 29th of May. So I think that's my report on that.
And if I could just chime in on that. So yeah, the intent is to have this application kind of a one-stop shop, if you will. So one of the things that I will say is depending on what the liquor license changes are, there may be an additional form that might need to be filled out. The state governs a lot of these liquor laws and doesn't leave it necessarily to our local licensing authority. But hopefully we'll have all the information ready to go by the end of this week to allow a lot of these merchants and restaurants ready to hit the ground running when they're given the all clear.
Yeah, let me, if I may, Mayor, I just want to make sure it's clear. The staff's intent is to make this very efficient. And so that when people make an application, we can tell them very promptly whatever conditions may apply here, but that's the intent.
And we're not going to charge for any of those permits, not the city.
Excellent. And also, I know that you have a chart already drawn up as the likely boundaries. Or is there potential to expand some of those boundaries? I know we've been getting some calls from Alamo folks that want to be included as part of this. So that's something we may want to discuss here over the next 2 days.
Correct. Yeah, we do see this application as kind of a template. So we're hoping that Tri-County Health will approve this. And we do see other applications throughout the city and probably throughout the next several months.
And Mayor, the item that's before council tonight, it kind of calls out Main Street, but it allows for the closure of other public rights of way. So if Alamo was decided to be one of those, that could certainly be done.
Yeah, Mr. Driscoll.
Yes, Reed, has private clubs been addressed in this meeting? I'm thinking mostly about the Elks.
I'm sorry, mostly about whom?
The Elks.
Looking at this, I don't know if it is specific as the Elks. I honestly just got this about 15 minutes ago, so I don't believe it's part of it, but let me check on that.
Great. Councilmember Millman.
So I'm sort of thinking in the lines of Louisiana. Do you foresee people being able to walk around with their cups of adult beverages on Main Street, or are they going to be just, relegated to wherever it is that they are?
Right. What our current liquor licensing laws state is that it has to be contiguous to your actual building. So it's not going to be, Nashville or Louisiana where you're walking around down the streets with open bottles of whatever your choice is. So, but hopefully it allows for, a lot of these retailers and restaurants to expand capacity by being able to move out into the public right away. We'll have some nice weather for that.
I'm sorry, one other real quick question. Would that pertain, like Pat was asking about the Elks Club, would that also pertain down the street to Aspen Grove?
Yeah, right now there would be a slightly different process, but for the purpose of this application, whether it's private property that you're seeking to expand to or public property, the process is going to be the same. There may be an additional element to it if it's private property, just in terms of a liquor license, but this is just going to be the one permit that you need.
Councilmember Elrod.
Thank you, Jerry. Mark, you said that you're seeking approval from Tri-County. In today's call at Tri-County, the way they positioned it, it wasn't necessarily approval, but consultation. So they encourage municipalities to consult with them on some of these variances, but it's not necessarily an official approval. I just wanted to get that clarification from you of how you understood it.
Well, I understood it as being approval. So I think perhaps that has changed in the last couple of weeks. But when my initial discussion with them is we were going to submit the plan to Tri-County Health. They were going to intercede on our behalf to the state for approval.
Okay, and so it may be depending on what we're asking for, but they did talk to just, everyone that was present at the meeting today that, please reach out for consultation, but they're not necessarily taking the role of an approve or deny. Okay.
Great. All right. Mark Rupp, do you have anything else?
I do not, Mayor.
City Attorney.
Nothing more from me.
Great. And we'll go to our council members. We'll start with Councilmember Driscoll. Then we'll go to Elrod, Fay, Grove, Milliman, and then Mayor Pro Tem.
No report.
All right,
No report.
no report. Councilmember Elrod.
All right. So like just mentioned, I sat in on the Tri-County Health call today, and I would just say, follow the newsletters that we get from them on the numbers. One particular thing they called out was the way they're reporting deaths from COVID is changing. So just be aware that there's a change in that, especially if getting questions from citizens. And then, but apart from that, all other data points are good. And I think that's what's driving the governor to make the decisions that he is, which is fantastic for us. And then I went to the South Suburban Parks and Rec meeting on last week sometime. They gave an update on their budget, just like we recently had. I think what's very concerning for them is that 40% of the revenues come from user fees and registration. So obviously they're not getting any of those. They did have layoffs, permanent layoffs. That was one way to mitigate the impact of that. Golf courses, everybody knows they're open, but because they're spreading out the time for the tee times, it's still, even though they're fully booked, they're not going to recoup all the revenue there. On some good news, they're still on target to complete their regional recreation center by the end of the year. That's about all. That was good news. Oh no, here's another clever thing. Actually, they are being resourceful. Their family, for example, their family sports center, they're renting out that parking lot for, I think they're renting it to maybe Centennial Airport or another entity in that area for revenue. So they're being very resourceful with some of their assets that aren't able to be fully utilized at this time. I did bring up to South Suburban, and we'll be meeting. Pam and I are the liaisons. We'll start our subcommittee meetings. We have some citizens in the community here in District 4. Ridgeview Park has a pond that has very little water, similar to what we experienced at Spring Park, or Kitchering Park, Mark. But the water is really low. The fish are dying. It's not pretty. So we're going to try to address that together with South Suburban. That's it.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the report. Councilmember Fay.
Unmute. Xcel Energy has announced that they have an energy audit or energy assessment program for businesses. And this is a free survey of the businesses' energy usage, gives them an opportunity to reduce their energy bills significantly and also qualify for rebates. So this would be something like get the assessment and learn that if you turn down the temperature in your building a couple degrees that most people wouldn't notice, you could save energy and pay less money for your bill. And that more information is available on Xcel's website.
Great, thank you. And I see that the RTD, they're doing their search for executive director under these interesting times for RTD. So that'll be interesting how that goes. So, all right, well, thank you for your report. Councilmember Grove.
Thanks, Jerry. Last Monday, there was a joint meeting between the Historical Preservation Board and the Planning Commission. And they had a great presentation from 2 CU students who had been working with staff on a urban planning project having to do with Main Street and Alamo Street. And they presented it and had some great suggestions about pedestrian crossings and ways to enhance the pedestrian experience, including some pocket park ideas. Also, during the meeting, they reviewed some of the results of the Envision Studio, and they agreed with most of it. They were a little disappointed at the high density examples, but were hopeful about having future examples that included the context. Rick Cronenberger, who's on the Historical Preservation Board, spearheaded an interesting project where he sent out a survey to each member of the Planning Commission and Historical Preservation Board and really asked them some very thought-provoking questions about design and character of the Main Street area. And then he took all the results and presented them and suggested maybe there could be a walking tour to kind of enhance the information that they would gather. And then from the survey, and if they can do a walking tour, then they would come up with some statements about the character of downtown and enhancing that pedestrian experience that maybe could be rolled into the design guidelines. Also, the Historical Preservation Board is exploring the option of maybe a broader historical district beyond just Main Street, maybe to include Alamo, maybe something separate. See if that's something that would be appropriate at this point in time. And that's it.
Great. And for our city attorney, if they do a walking tour with 3 or more planning commissioners or historic preservation, they do need to post that?
They would need to post that. I think how they envisioned it, they would have 2 persons from HPB and 2 persons from planning. So they'd have a total of 4, which wouldn't need to be posted. But anytime you have 3 or more members from one local board, you would need to post that.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, Councilmember Milliman.
Thank you, Jerry. I have a couple updates. I talked to Josh Kalkhurst. He is the general manager for Aspen Grove. Talked to him yesterday. He stated that about 75% of the stores are open, a lot of them curbside. But he expects all the stores except for the Alamo Draft House should be open within the next 2 weeks. And everybody, I'm sure, is anxious. A lot of people are anxiously awaiting for the Apple store to reopen. That store, the employees are ready to go. They're just waiting for approval from corporate. Obviously, you heard about the requirements about the restaurants, waiting for that news from the governor next week. Paris Street Market is opening June 6th, and the Farmers Market is opening June 17th. And those should run through the summer, barring any major snafus. With regards to the library and the museum, with regards to the library, the curbside pickup program service has been postponed just for a short period of time. They're waiting for approval from Tri-County Health. And with the museum update, they have an opening on May 22nd. It's the Best of Show virtual exhibit. It's called Perspectives. And the collections division staff is working with IT to create a GIS tour of some of the permanent installments of artwork that was purchased by the Fine Arts Board over the last couple of years. And then my last update is with South Metro Housing Options. We had our very first housing task force meeting on May the 6th. So I'm super excited about that. I think there's going to be some good things coming with that. And then I was asked to share just an update on Libby Bortz. Tri-County Health granted Libby Bortz quote unquote resolution status last week, which means that their facility has gone 28 days or more with no new cases of COVID, while they're following all the health guidelines and protocols. And also they hired a new executive director during all of this chaotic COVID time. Her name's Emma Mallory. And she is really working hard on a plan to help slowly reopen that community, to reunite families as much as they can, as much as possible. And a little bit tidbit about Emma, she is an RN and she's currently working on her doctorate of nurse practitioner program at CU. So they're very excited to have her on board and leading Libby Bortz. And that's it.
Great, thank you very much. Mayor Pro Tem Millen.
Yeah, thanks. This past Saturday, I attended the 2020 Littleton Public Schools Foundation Spirit Celebration fundraiser, which this year was online and virtual. And Beth Best and her team did a fantastic job. And I think as a testament to this community that we all care so much about, raised over $75,000, which actually compares pretty favorably to some of their fundraising in years past. So well done to the Littleton Public Schools Foundation.
Great. All right, thank you very much. All right, I just have a couple items. I just want to thank our city clerk, Colleen Norton, for all the support that she gives to me and very likely all of us on how to get information and how to get our computers to work and how to get laptops to download stuff that we can use. So thank you very much to Colleen. Also, I'd like to thank Tyler Barton, the media production manager, for everything he's doing to make these virtual meetings, not just for our meeting, but also for Planning Commission and I believe some other meetings that are started up too. And with that in mind, City Manager, if you could tell us a little bit about the boards, where we may be on that. But again, thank you to both Colleen and Tyler.
Mayor, I don't have an exact status of that, but we have been, Planning Commission and of course, Historic Preservation Board are the two that already have been moving forward. I think the Transportation and Mobility Board, there was some discussion about starting it yet this month. The balance we're looking at for the month of June. I think that's about the best of my recollection.
All right, cool. Councilmember Grove.
Next Gen Advisory Committee is going to meet next Thursday.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Via
All
Zoom,
right,
of course.
All right. We have on agenda item number 4, we have no citizen appearances. We'll go down to public comments if we could, and it is 6:55. And if we could have Sam Fox give us the process again so that the audience can participate.
Thank you, Mayor. If you wish to address City Council under public comment, please call 669-900-6833. And when prompted, enter the webinar ID 966-3557-4763. Please press *9 to be recognized. Citizens' microphones will be muted upon entry until the citizen is called upon to speak by the last 3 digits of their phone number. Please state your name and district or address clearly for the record. A reminder, the clerk will notify you when you have 30 seconds remaining and again when your time is up. Public comment is an opportunity to express opinions or ask questions regarding issues that are not part of public hearings on tonight's agenda. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. The city clerk will notify you when you have 30 seconds remaining, again when your time is up. The City Council is not authorized by Colorado Open Meetings Law to discuss, comment, or take action at the meeting on any issue raised by public comment that is not part of tonight's agenda. The mayor may refer the matter to the city manager and/or city attorney for immediate comment after public comment, or to staff to obtain additional information and report back to council as appropriate. We expect comments to be civil, disrespectful, and disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. Mayor, we do have some callers on the line. At this point in time, I'd like to remind callers to please press *9 if you would like to participate during public comment.
Great. And so can we have our first caller, please?
We're still waiting for that first hand to go up. I do want to just pause here and give a second in case anyone is dialing in.
All righty.
All right, Mayor, we have our first caller with their hand raised. Caller number at the last 3 digits of 819. You have been unmuted and you may begin speaking.
Hi, everyone. This is Pam Chadbourne, a block and a half from the City Center. I have a few comments about the consent agenda tonight, but first, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Sama, for taking care of us citizens so well and getting us on the agenda. And I would like to echo the mayor's thanks to Colleen and Tyler. Wow, incredible performance. Thank you so much. About the consent agenda, I've got big concerns though, and let me start out with the closure of Main Street. I have the feeling that some discussion has occurred that we, the citizens, didn't hear, or that something's not being dealt with, which should be. And that happens to be, what about the traffic and people who need to drive east and west through Littleton? Mineral is already a bad intersection, we know that. When you go to the north, Oxford doesn't go through to Wadsworth or east too far, it gets interrupted. And Hampton is a parking lot. To the south, C470 is also a traffic issue. And as everyone opens up, traffic becomes important again on Main Street. I have a huge concern with this. There's no end date to this. You should have an end date. You should have an expiration or a sunset time. There should be criteria for determining if it's doing more harm than good. What are the impacts on traffic? I'm just shocked at the vagueness of this. It really is the duty of public officials to assure that actions are regulated so that they balance everyone. The comments were all about the restaurants and nothing about the people who drive through, nothing about, I live downtown. How do I get across Main Street back and forth? What are your plans for this? This is poorly defined and should not be passed as is. Also, I'm concerned about 6E and 6F, the IGA with Littleton and Jefferson County and Arapahoe County. I would like to see constraints on public officials. It has to do with rule of law, and public officials should be constrained by rule of law. We, the people, should be able to see your criteria for these distributions, and we don't know them. So I don't like those IGAs either, because they're undefined and unlimited, except by some vague things that we've inherited. I want to see the constraints on our local distributions. Thanks very much for your consideration.
Great. Thank you very much, Pam. Next caller, please.
Mayor, we have no other callers in the queue.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. I will close the public hearing at 7 o'clock. And do we have any comments from the city manager or city attorney to address Ms. Chadbourne's concerns?
Mayor, just a few comments. So the closure of Main Street is a concept, the details for which would have to be reviewed and approved by the staff, much like we do any other special event. So we do look at all the other issues for access to business, pedestrian movements, traffic safety. So nothing would change there. I'm confident that the intent here is to protect public safety and the movement of traffic. I think too, on the IGAs, perhaps the city attorney may want to comment on this as well, but this is the CARES Act funding that has come to populations greater than 500,000. The counties actually do not have to share this funding with the cities. They've chosen to do that. So they're the ones who have set the conditions. And I've talked about this for at least the past week. The CARES Act has not been defined and on purpose by the US Congress. And so the staff for the last couple of weeks at the county level have been working with the Treasury Department to add some kind of structure to this. And so that's just the conditions of this funding. On May 26th, study session for the City Council, staff is going to be coming back to you and sharing our recommendation for the allocation of these funds based on the framework of the categories that have been defined by Congress. So that would be my immediate response to that.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, Mark, I would say, some of the constraints are what will be set forth in the CARES Act, what Congress ends up defining and the Treasury Department ends up defining. I will say for a majority of this money, Arapahoe County in particular, the city needs to get reimbursal approval prior to actually spending the money. So there are some checks and balances in terms of whether or not the county will actually approve some of our expenses prior to them being made.
Great. Thank you very much for that. And now we will move on to our consent agenda items. And with that, if we could have District 4 Council Member Milliman, please introduce the items.
Thank you, Mayor. Consent agenda item A, Resolution 45-2020, approving a First Amendment to an intergovernmental agreement between Arapahoe County and the Littleton Public Works Department for shared use of the Arapahoe County Radio Communications Network. Consent agenda item B, Resolution 10-2020, approving a second amended and restated Arapahoe County 911 Authority intergovernmental agreement. Consent agenda item C, Resolution 47-2020, a resolution approving the City of Littleton grant policy. Consent agenda item D, Resolution 18-2020, authorizing an amendment to an agreement regarding final design and construction of drainage and flood control improvements for Littles Creek at Gallup Street between the city and Mile High Flood District. Consent agenda item E, resolution 46-2020, approving an intergovernmental agreement between City of Littleton and Jefferson County regarding the CARES Act local government distributions. Consent agenda item F, resolution 51-2020, approving an intergovernmental agreement between the City of Littleton and Arapahoe County. Oh, are E and F the same? No, I'm sorry. Regarding the CARES Act local government distributions. Consent agenda item G, resolution 50-2020, approving the temporary closure of Main Street to vehicular traffic or other municipally owned thoroughfares and designated them as extended sidewalk space. Consent agenda item H, motion to approve appointments to the Next Generation Advisory Committee. And consent agenda item I, approval of the May 5th, 2020 virtual regular meeting minutes.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Milliman. All right, Council, I'm looking for a motion.
Mayor, I move to approve consent agenda items A through I.
Mayor Pro Tem Millen, second?
Yep.
Oh, okay. All right, we have Councilmember Elrod on the second. I do have a question for our city attorney. With the IGAs that we have we have one for Jefferson County, one for Arapahoe. Do we have one for Douglas County?
Douglas County did not qualify. They didn't have a population over 500,000. So it was only Jefferson County and Arapahoe County for Littleton's purposes.
Thank you for that clarification. All right, Council, we have a motion in a second. Is there any more discussion? If not, a thumbs up will be for approval. A thumbs down is opposed. So if we can vote now.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Great, thank you very much. We're moved down to item number 7 on our agenda, general business, of which we have none. So we'll go down to item number 8, ordinances on second reading and the public hearing. If we could have Sam Fox, if you could please inform the audience on how they can participate.
Thank you, Mayor. Citizens wishing to speak during any of the public hearings tonight should please call 669-900-6833. And when prompted, enter the webinar ID 966-3557-4763. Press *9 to raise your hand and be recognized. After the staff presentation, you will be recognized by the last 3 digits of your phone number, and speakers will have 3 minutes to address council on the public hearing topic. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Sama. All right, so our first item tonight is 8A, Ordinance 14-2020, an ordinance on second reading, amending the floodplain regulations contained in Title 10, Chapter 6, and referenced in Title 2, Chapter 9, and Title 10, Chapters 1, 2, and 3. Do we have a presentation, City Manager?
Yes, we do. And I think it's going to be Carolyn Rowan and Keith Reister, our Public Works Director. So I'll defer to them.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, councilors and members of the public. My name is Carolyn Roan. I'm the Water Resource Manager at the City of Littleton in the Public Works Engineering Division, and part of my duties here are as floodplain administrator. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay, can folks see this all right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm happy tonight to present Ordinance 14-2020, amending the floodplain regulations of Title 10, Chapter 6, and various cross-references. So the main reasons why we're doing this update is the current code lacks an administrative floodplain permit process. We also want to establish a floodplain overlay district, which is part of our zoning map. We want to modernize and clarify the code and address emissions and add some additional, more restrictive uses for the floodplain. And really what is driving this is that there has been an uptick in development projects and redevelopment projects within the floodplain in the city over the last few years. And in the course of reviewing and addressing those various project applications, there were some issues and kind of some omissions identified with the code that needed to be addressed. When we talk about administrative process, what we're referring to is having a codified process that identifies review and approval of floodplain permits in the city through the engineering department at Public Works, as opposed to having vague language in the code that identifies some of them to have to go to a public hearing before the Planning Commission. It's just not well defined. And so we really see this as providing a lot of efficiency in our processes. It adds consistency, not only with our current practice, because we are in fact administrating some floodplain permits administratively, and I'll provide an example in a moment, but it's also consistent with other jurisdictions around us. We really feel like these code revisions will add a lot of clarity, not only for staff and our processes, but also for applicants within the city, whether they're residents or engineers for developers. And there's also a lot of cost savings, not only in application fees. The application fees for a public hearing before Planning Commission are significantly higher than that of a regular floodplain permit. But there's also cost associated with time, whether it be staff time, Planning Commissioners' time, and public, and residents, if they're the ones that have to apply for those permits. And one example I want to use here is just one that was not that long ago came before us, and that was just simply building a garden shed in a backyard, and that portion of that backyard was in the floodplain. And I think that all of us here would agree that something like that's not appropriate to have to bring before a Planning Commission for a public hearing, and not to mention the increased costs associated with doing that for an individual homeowner. And so that was processed and dealt with administratively. And that's just one example. There's a very wide range of different kinds of projects that can occur in a floodplain, many of which are appropriate to be handled administratively. With that said, we aren't completely eliminating public hearings before the Planning Commission. There will still remain certain projects that will go before the Commission with a public hearing. Any projects that are required to do a conditional letter of map revision through FEMA. This is a specific process where FEMA modifies their maps. And there's certain triggers for a conditional letter of map revision process, namely that there's a certain amount of increase in floodplain elevations and whatnot. And then certain projects with a larger footprint or a potential increase in life safety issues would also be something that goes before the Commission, in addition to any appeals that are made through the engineering department and the floodplain administrator would go before the Planning Commission as well. So there will still definitely be opportunities for public input on certain projects. A floodplain overlay district is something that we felt was necessary to introduce as part of these revisions. This really will help increase awareness of floodplains in the city and flood risks, not just for residents and developers and engineers working for developers, but also for staff, because oftentimes projects will come in to different and are presented to different members of staff in different divisions. And when that overlay district is on, and oftentimes those projects, the first thing they look at is the zoning map, because they look to that to find what are the building restrictions for my property or for this property that we're interested in. And if that overlay district is on that map, then it's just more upfront, and those issues are brought up immediately rather than being found out later, which is sometimes the case, depending on who an applicant might talk to first. So it just helps increase that awareness all across the board. It adds some transparency, just making it very clear, here are where these flood risk areas are in the city. And then because floodplains do have their own building restrictions associated with them, that it really does somewhat belong on the zoning map, just like any other zoning restrictions, because they all provide some restrictions on the kinds of development that can occur. So it really is appropriate. here is some examples of what that looks like. On the right is the larger scale picture of what the new zoning map would look like with these overlay districts. And on the left is a zoom in view. The dashed blue area there is the floodplain, and the underlying zones colors show through that. So it really is an overlay showing that there's different kinds of restrictions applying to a certain area. And the floodplain overlay district will have the designation FP-O. Just as an overall summary of the proposed changes to the code, most of the changes are in Title 10, Chapter 6. That's where our floodplain regulations reside. And that's where we are adding the language associated with this administrative process. And also a lot of clarifying language and reorganization of the code, making it more clear. We're modifying the references to the Planning Commission and public hearings, and that appears in Title 2, Chapter 9, and also Title 10, Chapter 1. And then we are adding the floodplain overlay district, and those references are contained in various chapters of Title 10, Chapters 1, 2, and 3, as shown here on the slide. And then lastly, we are also adding some more floodplain development restrictions into the code, that either clarifying them when they were already there or adding them. One of which is prohibiting projects that increase flooding elevation at any adjacent buildings, excuse me. This is something that really is a FEMA requirement, but there's some loopholes in the current state and FEMA code regarding this. And so I felt like it was best to spell it out in our city code very clearly. We're also prohibiting large fill projects that have the potential to increase some life safety issues in areas that are not specifically designated for drainage. So prohibiting projects that might increase risk in roadways, for instance, because some of our floodplains are within roads, not in green belts, for instance. We're also requiring a conditional letter of map revision review for certain projects through FEMA, even if the state and FEMA requirements don't trigger that. There's some cases where we're going to go ahead and require that. We're requiring freeboard, the 1 foot freeboard for lowest floor elevations of buildings within floodplains is already a requirement. We are also adding a requirement for any buildings immediately adjacent to the floodplain to also have that freeboard. We've added some fencing restrictions within the floodplain and also clarified that any supporting utilities for buildings are also to be elevated to that 1 foot freeboard level. And this would include air conditioning, heating units, electric supply, that sort of thing. Let's see. We did conduct some public outreach regarding these floodplain regulation changes. We mailed a postcard to 1,600 addresses within the city. This included residents at properties, including renters at apartments that are and rental units within the floodplain, property owners that may not be residents at that property, and also businesses. And this postcard included various information of where they can find more information about floodplains and the current regulations. And it also included a link to a survey where we had a number of questions asking them how they felt about the code changes, what they liked, what they didn't like, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, we only got 9 responses to that online survey. And then there was a couple email questions that came in to me. And in general, the results of that outreach, what people liked was that they liked that there were more restrictions in floodplains. They also liked that we were adding consistency with surrounding jurisdictions in terms of our requirements. Some of the dislikes was that one respondent felt like the administrative process seemed subjective. One respondent didn't like that there was not an outright ban on any floodplain development. One respondent didn't like the code language because it was difficult to understand. And then another respondent commented that they felt that all floodplains should be in green belts. So that was something that I guess they didn't like because that wasn't a requirement in the code. Oops. I'm sorry. So that actually concludes my presentation tonight. Thank you very much, and I will turn it back to the mayor for any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Carolyn. Appreciate that very much. Hey, now is Mile High Floodplain District involved in this projects that you were talking about tonight?
In the floodplain code revisions, you mean, or in the permit review process?
Both.
Yeah, we generally will bring in them for a consult review just to make sure they're in concurrence with any decisions that we're making. Generally, the local jurisdictions have that first level of regulation, and Mile High doesn't necessarily have to get involved, but we usually do get their comment as well.
So I know Mile High is going to be working on Little's Creek on Gallup Street, hopefully this year, as well as maybe the Little Dry Creek, which on Broadway. That might be Englewood though, but you're involved with all that, I take it.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I am.
Great. All right. Thank you. Council, why don't we just go ahead right into, unless there's any more, anything else with the city manager, I'd like to go into the public comments. Do you have anything at this time? Nope. Okay, great. Well, with that, it is 7:20, and if we could have Sam Fox, if you could please inform our audience once again how they can participate.
Thank you. A reminder, citizens wishing to speak during public comment for item 8A, Ordinance 14-2020, who have not already called in, should please call 669-900-6833, and when prompted, enter webinar ID 966-3557-4763. If you are already on the line, please press *9 now to raise your hand and be recognized. All right, Mayor, we have a caller on the line. Caller with the last 3 digits of 819. You have been unmuted. Please begin speaking.
Hi, this is Pam Chapworn, and I live very close to the South Platte River and close to some drainage tributaries to the river. I care a lot about floodplains. I live on a slope as well, so it's important to me to pay attention to how water runs. And I think it's fine to put the floodplain map on the zoning map. That sounds fine. But I've spoken about this before. It is not a good thing for our city to move in the direction of additional administrative approvals for this. I'm going to try to point out a few things that I regard as drivers. But as a general comment, you know what? We don't need government. We could just let people do whatever they want, and the public doesn't need to be informed. Why do we have government at all in the United States? It's because it serves a purpose, and part of that is informing the people and making sure the people are engaged in important decisions. Floodplains and tributaries of the South Platte are of vital importance to people who live in Littleton. We prize the South Platte River, and we have tributaries that flow into it. And these can be assets, which we're only regarding right now as impedances to development, and that we have to support that and approve them administratively because it's more efficient and takes less time and doesn't cost as much. If a developer wants to develop in a floodplain in Littleton, we should have them pay the money. And I'm sorry, it's not that much more. This is an appalling excuse, I think. And the people should be informed. We should know about this. There's no harm here. Over the past 3-4 years, there's only been 4 of these that have been public, and that isn't that much of a burden to these developers. They were huge, pretty much huge proposals. They can afford it. And the people who came out wanted to know about these things. And our public requirement is the only thing that let them know about this. I'm going to say we were steamrollered, but if we don't have the opportunity to know about this, then we won't even know at all. And you folks won't be serving us by making sure we know about these.
30 seconds.
Please do not let this be shifted back administratively. look, if the shed was approved administratively, our current code doesn't prohibit that. It's fine. So there's no harm in that. There isn't a harm here that needs to be fixed and that we have to have more administrative approval. We should keep the public notice that we require now so that the public is informed, engaged, and involved in these kind of changes, especially as we densify.
Pam, your
Being
time's
consistent
up.
with Englewood and water policy is not a good thing. Thanks very much.
All right, well, thank you very much, Pam. Do we have another caller?
Mayor, there are no other callers in the queue.
Great, well, thank you very much. Well, with that, I will close the public comment at 7:24. Council, I am looking for a discussion or a motion, unless the city manager would like to comment on anything at this time.
No comments, Mayor.
Okay, great. All right, if we could move into discussion or motion, Council Member Elrod.
Thank you, Jerry. We didn't have a chance to ask questions before we went to public comments. I have some questions for Carolyn, if that's okay. Carolyn, you talked about, a certain footprint would go to Planning Commission, so a public process. Can you be more specific about, what size, or is it one particular building, or if we have a parcel of land that may be developed with different buildings on it? How do you make that decision of what is truly going to go to a public process versus administrative?
The way we've written this ordinance is that projects that any projects that are located within a regulatory floodway, that's a portion of the floodplain that's higher risk. Any projects that are proposed to be in that zone would require Planning Commission public hearing and a conditional letter of map revision with FEMA. Even if their hydraulic analysis shows that they're not causing an increase in elevations with that project, we're still going to require that those go to public hearing just because it is in a higher hazard area. In addition, any projects that that are in an area that does not have a floodway defined, if they cause more than a 6-inch increase in floodplain elevation, those too would be required to go before Planning Commission and a CLOMR application. And then in addition to that, larger projects, when I mentioned the larger footprint or life safety kinds of projects, in discussions with Planning Commission prior to bringing this before the City Council, we discussed having a threshold of certain kinds of projects. And what we decided upon was projects that involve a great deal of fill, and we define that as being over 1/4 acre of fill such that it's elevating the ground level above the floodplain elevation. And essentially, think of it as you will as pushing the water into a different area. Any kind of projects that do that and increase that hazard in that resulting area where they're pushing the water to. And there's a way of defining that's been established by the state when it creates a life safety issue. Any projects like that would be prohibited unless they decided to go before Planning Commission for an appeal, in other words. So those are essentially the projects that would be put forth the Planning Commission. And so really, most of the projects that have come before Planning Commission in the last few years would, if I recall correctly, most of those would still be ones that would go to public hearing because they're substantial projects that are large. I'm thinking of the Enser property, for instance, Enser properties north and south. Those are pretty substantial jobs, pretty substantial projects. Does that answer your question?
I have a follow-up on this. On the second scenario, you talked about if it displaces the water, I think by 6 inches or something like that. Who determines that? Is that by the applicant, or is the city doing an analysis? Do we have, would you be doing that analysis? How do we know that scenario?
Yeah, the applicants are required to hire engineers that are competent in hydraulic engineering to do a model to look at what kind of increase in floodplain elevation or changes in velocity and depths occur as part of a project. And then staff in the engineering department and myself review those analyses to make sure they're sound and there's no emissions and errors and that sort of thing.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem.
Carolyn, thanks for your presentation. You mentioned cost savings and related to that efficiency as hoped for advantages of moving this to administrative review. That's important, of course. More important than those things to me is that the city reach a high quality decision. And it seems to me like there's a lot of expertise that's required to get to the right decision when we're talking about hydraulic engineering that maybe our planning commissioners for everything that they are good at don't possess. Is it fair to say that moving this to administrative review is going to lend that kind of expertise, that kind of high quality decision making? That's another advantage that we're hoping for to moving this to administrative review. That a bunch of people who understand hydraulic engineering are the ones discussing this and making the decisions.
Yeah, that's right, Mayor Pro Tem. The Planning Commission, there's certain members of the Planning Commission currently that are well versed in hydraulics, but that isn't always going to be the case with the commission. And some of them have, I think, a certain level of discomfort making decisions based on some really pretty highly technical data. And so they're still very reliant on staff's recommendations and reviews. And we've tried hard here within the engineering division to bring in expertise so that we can properly evaluate these types of applications so that an adequate and proper review is completed.
Can you just quick speak to that survey respondents' concern that this would be subjective? It seems to me like transferring this to administrative review, putting it in the hands of experts would make it really more a technical decision and would remove a lot of the subjectivity. But can you speak to that concern?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think one of the main purposes of this code is to make it more clear and concise so that it is much more objective decision where the detail is laid out in the code and there isn't as much subjective decisions or interpretations to be made. And so I don't necessarily agree with the comment. I think maybe there's that perception that it's that when it's left to individuals to make the decision versus a public body, that there's somehow a more subjectivity. But I agree with you that I feel like it's becoming more objective and more technically associated.
Good.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Council. Any other questions? Yeah, I see none. City Manager, do you have anything else you want to add? Great. Nothing at this point? Great. All right, Council, I'm looking for a motion.
I move to approve the ordinance on second reading, amending the floodplain regulations contained in Title 10, Chapters 1, 2, 3, and 6, and referenced in Title 2, Chapter 9.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second by Council Member Elrod. If we have no further discussion, let's take it to the vote, Council. Thumbs up is agreeing, thumbs down is opposed. Ready? Vote.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Great, thank you, Council. Thank you, City Clerk. All right, we're going to move on to our next item, which is 8B, an ordinance 17-2020, an ordinance on second reading, amending Littleton City Code Title 7, Section 7-3-5, and Title 10, Sections 10-1-2, 10-1-8, 10-1-9, 10-3-1, 10-3-2, 10-4-1, 10-4-4, 10-4-9, and 10-12-4, with the intent of clarifying development regulations and improving public engagement process. That's one I would normally have, I think, the Mayor Pro Tem read on that one. City Manager, we have a presentation.
Yes, Mayor. Actually, I'm going to turn this over to Jennifer Henninger. She's going to make the presentation.
Tyler, can you put my video back on? And we'll need mics on as well.
I see your presentation.
Good evening, Council. Great to see you all again, even though it's virtually. Tonight, we hope to conclude our phase 1 code amendments for downtown. Well, code amendments will be for the entire city, but this is in relation to our updates that we're doing. So just to remind you where we are in this process, go ahead, Mike, and Mike has control of the slides. Okay, so the point we are in the process, if you'll remember, we have gone through this whole phase 1 process. We have been with council several times, as well as planning commission, asking for feedback on the proposed changes that we would like to make to the code. Again, this is phase 1. There will be additional changes in our phase 2, which are anticipated in October of this year, and then culminating with an entirely new ULUC in October of 21. But we've had our first reading on this, and tonight is our second reading and public hearing. Next slide. So in short, what we're requesting this evening are the following items. One is revising allowed construction hours, adding new definitions that have been missing, and as we review things come up time and time and again. Also expanding on the preliminary project plan process, adding some steps to that process that Mike will go into. We're also adding a written notification requirement to residents, not only property owners, but also residents for development projects that come through. Making auto-oriented uses conditional uses downtown, updating how we measure and define site distance triangles, updating our accessory structure regulations to make it more clear, and then also updating portions of our parking regulations. So at this time, I'm going to turn this over to Mike, and he'll go into a little bit more detail on each of these proposed code amendments.
Thanks, Jennifer, and good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. Just a quick guide on these slides that I'm going to run through. You've received several attachments to your packet tonight, one of which is the proposed code amendment and Exhibit A, which are the blue lines to the code, which explain what portions of the code are changing, and also the downtown phase 1 code amendment summary table. The number you see on the slide with the hash mark refers to that summary table. And construction activities, this one is the topic. And then in parentheses, this refers to the blue line document. It is the title, and then the dash, and the chapter, and then the section. So this first piece is construction activities. Currently, construction activities are allowed from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day. We have proposed to change that from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, and from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. The second and third proposed changes are the definition of building and the definition of multiple family dwelling. And we can get into those if you have questions. The fourth proposed change is to the height of buildings. And I'm not sure why the illustrations didn't come up here. I'm sorry. So right now we measure the height of building on 4 data points. We are proposing to change that to 2 data points, which should create less confusion in the measurement of heights and inconsistency in site plans and how we measure heights. There we go. Well, there's one of the illustrations. I had kind of the way we did it previously, and then how we are proposing to do it. This does show the 2 points of measurements that we would take, basically the average from the highest and lowest points of the structure. The fifth proposed change is permitted encroachments into setbacks. And this is in line with other communities and allows eaves, gutters, and foundation projections to encroach into side setbacks, and then some porches and decks to encroach into front and rear setbacks. The sixth change we propose is to clarify the definition of townhome and separate it from multifamily development. Seventh proposed change is the P4 process. Currently, that's only available to rezonings, either planned developments or rezonings. We'd like to, it's a popular program. We'd like to expand that to include major site development plans. We'd also like to expand that to the Historical Preservation Board in a study session to get their input in cases where historical aspects are affected. Currently, the Community Development Director is the only one who presents. We'd propose to add the applicant into that mix and allow them to answer some questions. The eighth proposed change is to mailed notice. Currently, that only goes to property owners within 700 feet. We would propose to change that to include all residents and mail to the address itself and any unit numbers. The ninth proposed change is to the land use table. This changes use permitted by right to permitted use and implies that some uses may not necessarily be consistent with the comprehensive plan. We can factor that into the equation. Also, it adds an asterisk for conditional uses specific to the downtown area. And with that, we have a slide of the table itself, but I may be able to find that. The 10th.
The table's available in their blue lines.
Okay, yeah, the table is available in the blue lines. I thought I had it on this presentation as well. But the 10th proposed changes to the site distance triangle, and this will bring us up to the AASHTO standards, which are the best available standards from professional organizations. It probably aligns us with other communities and allows for flexibility in relation to road context and speeds and that type of thing. The 11th proposed change is to accessory structures and basically aligns the code with the building regulations. Right now, accessory structures that are under 120 square feet in floor area do not have to have a building permit. There's a slight difference in the building code and the zoning code. The building code says floor area, the zoning code says roof area, which leads to some confusion. And we would change to the zoning code to floor area to be consistent. And also includes a minimum separation between accessory structures and principal structures. And this works in concert with the setback encroachments. Finally, we have some changes to some proposed changes to the parking requirements. The first is to round up in cases where parking requirements come to a fraction of a space, we round up always. We've done this consistently for years, but it hasn't been listed specifically in the code. And we'd like to include that language in the code. And then we propose to change the minimum parking space size from 20 feet in length to 18 feet in length, and change the compact parking space size from 18 feet in length to 15 feet in length. This is consistent with many other area municipalities, or would be consistent with many other area municipalities and how they regulate parking stall sizes. And then finally, the last proposed change is to update accessible space requirements to evolve with ADA, basically federal law and ADA requirements. And I'll turn it back over to Jen.
Sorry, I have to unmute myself. So the Planning Commission recommendation was for approval with some minor tweaks, and those tweaks were on the weekend construction hours. We had originally suggested 8 and they moved it to 9. And then we had also discussed having windows and architectural features being allowed to encroach into the setbacks, and that was requested to be removed. And so those changes have been made on the Exhibit A that you have in front of you. So our staff recommendation to you all is approval of this ordinance as written. And this concludes staff comments.
Great. Mark, City Manager, do you have anything you wanted to add to the presentation at this time?
I do not, Mayor, but thank you.
Great. And just for the sake of time, I want to go right into the public comments because we have a meeting after this meeting. So I'm going to move right into that. So with that, if we could have, it is 7:45. If we could have Sam Fox, if you could please inform the audience how they can participate.
Thank you. A reminder, if you wish to speak during public comment or public hearing for the item 8B, Ordinance 17-2020, and have not already called in, please call 669-900-6833 and use the webinar ID 966-3557-4763. Please press *9 now if you would like to be recognized for public comment.
And do we have any callers?
Mayor, we have callers on the line, but no one has pressed *9. I'd just like to take a pause to make sure we've allowed time for people to call in and press *9.
You bet.
And we now have someone with their hand raised.
All righty.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 819. You have been unmuted. Please begin speaking now.
Hi, this is Pam Chadbourne again. And I've got concerns about some of these. Some of them are great, reducing the construction hours. Thank you very much. I think that I'm sure that didn't come from people like me, but I'm glad that you guys are responding to someone who complained about this, and it's a good thing to do. It is good to clarify height. I'm not sure that I understand this, the impact of this and how it could be worked around. I don't think we've heard that. So I'm concerned about the height thing, that we don't understand it fully. But a few things I've got big concerns about, and that's probably what I should speak about. Don't reduce parking space sizes. Or if you do, don't do it on the north side of town where we have historic districts yet. Maybe this is good later, but we have a survey that talks about the mid-century modern value of Littleton Boulevard. We've not acted on it for 3 years. That's horrible. And honestly, the parking space sizes are part of the impression of mid-century modern. It's a vital part. And we should not reduce parking space size. I'm going to say, yeah, some communities have done this. Many have not. And if in the future, we want to be one of those communities where people avoid because our parking lots are uncomfortable, go ahead and do this now. I think it's a bad idea. It's not the right thing to do. There's no good reason for this other than developers, and don't do it now. For P4 applications, if you're going to allow the applicant to present, then you must require that the staff present an assessment and that the public be allowed to give input as well. This has always been the problem with P4, is that it allows only people with special access to give a vote. That's appalling on its face. And now to only allow the applicant and the people in power to discuss this is, I can't express my appalled reaction to this. This is not what the principle of American government is.
30 seconds.
So if you're going to allow the applicant, you've got to allow the staff to present technical findings and the public to give a reaction. And finally, don't reduce the setbacks yet, especially some of these. We don't know what the impacts of these are going to be on downtown, except other than negative. You're increasing density, you're increasing pressure on people. I know that my neighbors are upset about the 4-story sixplex being put in next to their 3-story fourplex. This is crazy. I appreciate that, but
all right, thank you very much, caller. We appreciate your comments. And Sarah Fox, do we have any other callers?
No other callers.
All right. And with that, I will close the public comment at 7:49. And City Manager, did you have anything you want to add at this point?
No, I do not, Mayor.
Great. All right. Council, I'll open it up for discussion and motion. Councilmember Fay.
I have a concern about, based on the behavior of the developers in recent meetings we've had. Could we impose a time limit upon the developer? You talked about the developer would have an opportunity to respond to questions. I could see a developer morphing that into an opportunity to make a speech or a pitch. Could we limit that to 3 minutes, like all of the other input? And I agree with citizen Pam Chadbourne that we really do need, if we're going to hear from the developer, we need to also be able to hear from the public, because it is quite one-sided to hear from the developer and no one else. So could we add those things?
All right, Council Member, do we have a response for Council Member Fay? Please.
Yeah, it would take a motion to modify the proposed ordinance and a second, and obviously a majority.
Do I make that now or wait till the end of
Well, we don't have a main motion yet. We would need a main motion, and then you could make a motion to amend.
So if you want to hang off, we'll do a little discussion. All right, is that it for your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. Councilmember Grove.
I agree with Carol to have public make a statement. I do not agree with limiting the applicant to 3 minutes. Sometimes these projects are very complex, and from experience on HPB, if we had had the P4 process with that and gone through the project, we would have saved the applicant, the developer, and the staff tons of time and effort and expense. So I don't think limiting their presentation is in the best interest of efficiency. And I would not support that portion of the motion.
Mayor, if I could interrupt,
Yes.
we really should have a motion and a second on the table.
We can have discussion first, and it can go either way, and that's where we are right now. Councilmember Elrod.
Thank you. So I actually have questions. So less about discussion, but more about questions. And Jerry, are you wanting, so this is the second one that you're not taking questions before we go to public comment. So for the rest of tonight's session, are you intending that we go to presentations, public comment, and then we're having questions and discussion and motions? We just changed.
Yeah, tonight, because we have a late night here, it's turning out to be, so I'm just trying to move the meeting along. Do you have a question at this time?
I do have questions.
Or motion, either one.
I have a question. I have more than one
Great.
question. So on the height, you made a comment about it, and previously it was confusing and inconsistent. Can you speak a little bit more about that? What was inconsistent about the previous way we did height, and whether or not that inconsistency may still be present in the current proposal?
Certainly. So previously, or under the current code, I think the most confusion arose from walkout elevations, where let's say the front of the building had was higher than the back of the building, basically. The current code relies on 4 points of measurement and does not really factor in artificially manipulated grading. So we've simplified the definition of height to only look at 2 points of the building, and also to factor in artificially manipulated grading. And I think this will help us deliver a more consistent product. The best examples I can think of are on Curtis Street, where the rear elevation is on a 30-foot height limit. You've got a rear elevation that goes up 4 stories and still meets our current city code, which I think was maybe shocking to the neighbors of the development, and this will hopefully address that.
And regarding, I have 2 more questions, Jerry.
Okay.
Regarding the P4 process, including HPB, so the first part of this question is, how will you be including HPP? Will it be a separate P4 meeting, or will it be combined with planning? And then the second part of my question is, when we're saying, or when you're suggesting that the developer will be able to present, is it more that they're available for question and answer, or are they giving formal presentations?
Mike, do you want me to take this?
Certainly.
So, Karina, in regards to the P4, so we're imagining that it would actually be 3 separate meetings, and we would start with, if it's something downtown and needs HPB input on, we would start with HPB, and then we would take it to Planning Commission. So Planning Commission, we would also share with Planning Commission kind of the outcome of HPB's discussion on it. And then when we get to council, you would have HPB's input as well as Planning Commission's input for what is presented and given to you at that P4 process. So, and the clarification that was made on this P4 process is before the applicant did not have an opportunity to speak. So we are changing the wording that gives the applicant the opportunity to present what they're doing, and also be available for questions from council and TV and Planning Commission. Does that answer your question?
If we could pull up the council members again, that would be great.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. All right. And anybody else have a question? Councilmember Fay, but before we go to Councilmember Fay, does Councilmember Milliman have a question, or Driscoll? All right, we'll go back second round for Councilmember Fay.
I would like to comment that the P4 process has been working exceedingly well, exactly as it is. And perhaps one of the strong points of it is that the developer does not have the opportunity to make a pitch. And that staff presents hopefully technical information. That provides a lot of balance, and it makes the P4 different from a normal second reading hearing. And
all right, thank you.
And I didn't. We're keeping it exactly like it is.
Cool. Is that it? All right, thank you. And Councilmember Pro Tem, I don't see you on the screen, so I don't know if you have a question or not.
There.
I do.
Another question. Please go ahead.
Jennifer and Mike, if there were the opportunity for public involvement in the P4 process, what might it look like?
The one thing that I need to iterate on the public side, public comment, is typically on the P4 processes, it has been a rezoning. So they would actually have a neighborhood meeting where property owners within 500 feet, Mike, I think it is, are notified and can come to a meeting and express their opinion on the project. So that is occurring already. So if we integrated public comment into a P4 process, I think something to remember on the P4 process is it is not a decision-making time. Nobody, council, planning commission, or HPV are not making a decision. They're merely giving some opinion. Mark, do you want to jump in here?
If I may, Mayor.
Please.
Yeah, I think obviously the council can do what you want with the process, but when it was originally proposed, it was specifically designed for a conversation between the applicant or staff in this particular case to the council and the planning commission. It was not intended to include the public directly as part of some kind of testimony. It was, in my opinion, I think that might be a mistake. I'm not sure that you would get applicants that would take advantage if they saw that now there's going to be a public process for comment around that. So that would be just one thing to consider. I do think that public does have an opportunity to comment on that under its current form, where according to our process, emails can be sent, and certainly we've highlighted a new process for comments to be submitted directly on an item being considered. So the P4 could go through that process in order for council to see some kind of public feedback before the meeting.
Good. All right, thank you. And I do have a question regarding parking. Why are we reducing the parking from, was it 20 to 18 feet?
So we think, and this was discussed by council several years ago and rejected. With the pressures of downtown development, we think that the idea is worth discussing again. This is something that may allow more, instead of focusing on parking, which is one of the major considerations of development, particularly in the downtown area. It may reduce the parking lot area and add to greenery or a building area. So we thought it was worth discussing again, and comes directly from the comprehensive plan, trying to take the focus away from, oh gosh, the vacuum is running here at the city offices. I've got to shut my door, but basically it comes directly from the comprehensive plan and trying to reduce the thanks, Jim, the focus of auto-oriented development.
And I know the city manager wants to chime in too, but I have a question. How many spaces do we figure we're going to add by cutting out 2 feet?
So on small developments, it's a matter of a few feet more of green space or perhaps building area. On larger developments, shopping centers and that type of thing, you can really make a difference in the site plan by that 2 foot difference in parking space.
All right, city manager.
If I may, Mayor, Council, I was the one who actually made the suggestion here some years ago to change from 20 to 18 feet. This was specifically a standard based on my experience, where the 18 feet is pretty common across the country. And that really is not the issue, is the stall length. It's more of the aisle width between the stalls. This is more of an engineering issue. And so that remains unchanged, and quite honestly is more than adequate, in my opinion, in order to facilitate proper parking lot design. And so the 2 feet addition to a stall really adds nothing other than just additional space, in my opinion.
Council, we're on second round. Okay, Mr. Driscoll.
Ready to make a motion or?
No.
Yeah, I make a motion to approve ordinance 17-2020.
A second.
We have a motion in the second. Council, more discussion? I see no more discussion. Then if we're ready for a vote, let's go ahead to a vote. A thumbs up is an approval and a thumbs down is opposed? Ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Great, thank you very much. And we're going to try to whip through these last two here a little quick. So we are now on agenda item 8C, ordinance number 20-2020, an ordinance on second reading authorizing a grant of biogas pipe.
What happened to the opportunity to make amendments?
It has to be.
I know, we skipped right into a vote without an opportunity to make an amendment.
We did go into a major vote and you didn't. We can, Reed, correct me if I'm wrong, we can still open up?
I believe you'd have to go through to reconsider to reopen the last one.
Okay, so we do a vote to reconsider the last vote, and then we can do an amendment if need be at that point. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that'll be the appropriate process right now.
All right, so I need a motion to reopen the last item. Do we have that motion?
I move to reopen the last item.
I'll second it. Okay, so we have motion and second to thumbs up to reopen it, thumbs down to not reopen it. Thumbs up, up, yes. Thumb down, no. Vote. City Clerk? City Clerk, we there? Okay, so I count 1, 2, thumbs up,
the
please.
vote
1,
is
2.
4-3 with council members Milliman, Malin, and Driscoll voting no. The motion carries.
Okay, so we are going to open it back up. And I'm sorry, Carol, that we moved along there too quickly then. Did you want to make an amendment? And then we'll go back and do the main motion again, if that's correct, Reed.
I would like to propose an amendment.
Okay.
That we either do not allow the developer to respond to questions, or we allow both the developer and the citizens to make comments on P4.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Could I ask Councilmember Fay to clarify that motion? It seems a little bit open-ended.
Could I ask city attorney to help me on this? Would you help me, Reed?
If I can unmute myself, yeah.
I'm trying to make it so that neither the developer nor the public has a chance for comment, or both.
So currently with the amendments that we've done, and I'll probably be looking, the changes that we've done to the P4 process, it's giving the applicant the ability to make a presentation or respond to comments. So your proposed amendment, I guess we would probably do it one at a time, because it seems as if you want, either everyone can or no one can.
Oh, okay, so that perhaps my motion is that I move that we remove from the ordinance the opportunity for the applicant to respond to questions.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Last call for a second. Okay, the motion fails. The amendment fails, I should say. All right, do we have any more amendments?
Well, the second part to Councilmember Fay's proposal.
Yes, okay.
Are you wanting to make that as an additional amendment?
I'd like to propose a second amendment.
Okay, please.
I propose an amendment to this ordinance to allow, in addition to the to restrict the applicant's response to questions to 3 minutes.
All right, we have a motion. Council, do we have a second? Okay.
Can you repeat it? I couldn't quite hear.
Okay, one more time, please.
Vote for it.
Pardon?
You already said you wouldn't vote for it.
Well,
she's asking you to repeat it, Carol.
She asked you to repeat the motion. the amendment?
I propose an amendment to limit the applicant's response to questions to 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, the amendment fails. All right, if we have no more amendments, we'll go back to the main motion once again. And a yes vote is in favor, and a thumbs up is in favor, and a thumbs down is not in favor. Council, if you please vote and clear for our city clerk.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
All right, we are finished. We're going to move on to item agenda 8C, an ordinance on second reading. Let's see, ordinance number 20-2020, an ordinance on second reading authorizing a grant of biogas pipeline and custody transfer station permanent easement between the City of Littleton and Public Service Company of Colorado located on the South Platte Water Renewal Partners Treatment Plant property. City Manager, you have a presentation for us?
Actually, Keith Reister, our Public Works Director, is prepared to give a brief presentation.
All right, thank you.
Hello, everybody. I think you can hear me now. I do have a brief presentation, basically as part of the biogas project that you're all familiar with down at the wastewater treatment plant. In the packet tonight, you have a copy of a map which shows basically a permanent non-exclusive easement that will go through the South Platte Water Renewal Partners site to attach the gas collection units and processing units to Excel's pipeline. All of the equipment in that run is Excel's. They will maintain it, they will take care of it, and if other things need to go in that easement, we will have the ability to put that in there. Just as a quick summary, the biogas project went online on October 31st. We're in the qualification process with the EPA and the fuel systems market. And right now we have what's called unverified RIN credits, renewable identification number credits. And we expect qualification here within the next couple of months, maybe even this month. Our revenue from the gas credits for the 2 months that we had at the end of last year would have been between $115,000 and $200,000 in revenue, which we'll eventually realize once we go through the qualification process here in the next couple of months. I'll be happy to answer any questions about the easement itself or any other questions you might have.
Great. Is that anything else from the City Manager?
No, Mayor, that's it.
Great. All right. I'd like to open up to the public comment at this time. It is 8:12. Sam Fox, if you could please inform the audience on how they can participate.
Thank you, Mayor. Reminder, citizens wishing to speak during public comment for item 8C, Ordinance 20-2020, who have not already called in, please dial 669-900-6833 and use the webinar ID 966-3557-4763. Please press *9 now to raise your hand and be recognized for public comment. Mayor, again, we do have people on the line. I'm just going to allow a minute for them to press *9.
All right. I'm ready when you're ready.
One more reminder, if you'd like to press *9, you can be available for public comment.
All right, we have no comments?
Correct.
Okay, well, I close the public comment at 8:13. And council, I'll move to either discussion or a motion at this time. Councilmember Elrod.
I warned you. Keith, why is this a permanent easement? So why permanent versus long-term easement for 20 years, 50 years? What are kind of the pros and cons of doing a permanent easement versus something else, I guess?
From an operational and legal standpoint, really, large scale utilities like this seek to have permanent easements for their facilities going forward. Somebody like Excel, that's part of the way they approach the process. Easements like this, I've seen, at least in my experience, I've seen 70, 80, 90-year-old easements for energy companies. And if in the future, if something changes, that would just negotiations with Excel, if we needed to change that easement, is what we would engage in and do so. That's pretty standard practice in the industry.
And if it's big negotiations, does that mean resources and money to get this back to us?
No, this is a situation we deal with easements and laying out easements across the city on a daily basis. It's part of the business we do, and this would be part of that work. Excel, does this every day. This is pretty standard practice for them and approaching, and if we have to adjust it, that they work pretty easily to do so. And I also know that it's from Excel's position, their position is always that this needs to be a permanent easement to protect their asset, because everything that's in the easement is their asset that they have paid for and will maintain and manage. And so they want to be able to make sure that responsibility is boxed in where their equipment is.
And what's the benefit to us to offer them a permanent easement?
They'll do business with us. That would probably be the first one. And that's part of their standard operating practice. And, for us, it's within our site. It's something that we would have lines running there anyway. It connects the facility to theirs. And, if we have to change it in the future, we'll go ahead and do that. But we don't project that unless there was a major league plant overhaul in the next few decades.
Thank you.
Good. Councilmember Driscoll.
I move to approve ordinance 20-2020 on second reading.
Second.
And we have a motion and a second. Second was by Mayor Pro Tem Lynn. Council, any more discussion? If not, let's go to a vote. So a thumbs up is in favor, a thumbs down is opposed. Ready, vote.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Great, thank you. We will move on to our last item for the night and before our study session. And we have item number 8D, ordinance 21-2020, an ordinance on second reading approving the 5-year agreement with Tyler Technologies for a new municipal court management system. City Manager.
Mayor and Council, actually, Danielle Trujillo, our court administrator, is here this evening to make a presentation on this software. So Danielle.
Hey, good evening. I'm Danielle Trujillo. I'm the court administrator, and I'm going to share my screen. So tonight we're here to ask for your approval for a 5-year contract. We actually have the unique opportunity of acquiring a new system, and with a 5-year contract, we can see immediate savings, not only in 2020, but in 2021. So some of the benefits that we are working towards as a city are paperless processing, online resolution and payments, and then also eliminating a high-risk server. And the current system that we have is unsupported. So we need to move forward on a new system. And the reason why we're looking for the 5-year contract is because there's immediate savings. And so we worked diligently. Dave Ems in IT helped us to work towards a better contract so that way we could acquire the system quickly and get it on board this year in 2020. Sorry, I talk kind of fast because I know we're trying to move along. Any questions?
Thank you, Danielle. All right, council, I can't see the council yet, but there we go. Do we have any questions, council? I see no council, no questions at all. Then council, I'm looking for we got to open up the public hearing. I'm sorry. Sarah Fox, if you could please inform the audience on how they can participate, and it is 8:18.
Thank you, Mayor. Last reminder, if you'd like to participate on item 8D, ordinance 21-2020, please call 669-900-6833. And when prompted, enter webinar ID 966-3557. 4763. I'd like to remind anyone in the queue to please press *9 right now if you wish to comment on this item.
All right, thank you, Sema.
I'll just give another reminder, we do have callers on the line. Please press *9 if you wish to comment. And we'll make this a last call for those on the line. Press *9. Mayor, no one has raised their hand for comment.
Okay, I will close the public hearing at 8:19, and Mayor Pro Tem.
I'd just like to be the one to make the motion on this. So I move to approve Ordinance 21-2020, an ordinance on second reading approving a 5-year agreement with Tyler Technologies for a new municipal court management system.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Councilmember Fay. Discussion, Councilmember Elrod.
No discussion, I was just in a second.
Okay, yeah, Councilmember Fay did get it in there. That was the second, wasn't it, Carol?
Yes, it was.
Okay, cool. All right, if there's no more discussion, let's go to a vote. Thumbs up is an approval and a thumbs down is opposed. Ready, vote?
Vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Great, thank you very much. And just a reminder, council, we are going into a study session. It is 8:20, hopefully 8:25. Does that give Tyler enough time to transfer over? I'm going to assume it does.
The answer is yes.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so we
have a different login?
No,
you will
stay on this call.
Stay in this
Council
room. Okay.
members stay on, and then Tyler has to, I don't know if Tyler has to do anything about it. Anyway, council, we are adjourned and we will reconvene at 8:25. like to call to order the City of Littleton City Council virtual study session for Tuesday, May 19, 2020. The time is 8:27. And we have one item on our agenda tonight, Council, and it is ID number 20-140. It's the Unified Land Use Code and Phase 2 updates. City Manager.
All right, thank you, Mayor. We have a fair amount of material to cover this evening here.
Oh, and I'm sorry if I may interrupt. We have scheduled 90 minutes, but that does not mean we need to use 90 minutes. There you go. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. That was basically going to be my point. So I think I'm trying to be sensitive to the council's time, and hopefully we will get through all this material. And I've talked with Kathleen Osher in advance here. If for some reason we can't get through all that, then we'll just look for another opportunity to kind of finish this conversation. I do not want to rush this. This is perhaps one of the most important conversations the council is going to have here over the next several months. And so I think with that, I'm probably just going to turn it over to Kathleen and make some introductions and move us along.
Good evening, Council. Kathleen Osher, Manager of Innovation and Performance Excellence. Glad to join you this evening. I'm joined tonight by Brett Keast, owner and CEO of Candid Keast Collaborative, his colleague Brian Mabry, who is the code practice leader for Candid Keast Collaborative, and then Nori Winter, owner of Winter and Company. So we're going to go through our presentation this evening, but to get us started, we sent you a series of policy questions for discussion this evening. We'd like to offer those when we're at that certain point in the presentation to kind of refer back to those questions. For those of you that were on council when we went through the update of the comprehensive plan, you might remember the time and attention that we spent on really that policy direction from you. We spent a lot of time developing those policy statements. For those of you that weren't on council, I think all of you were following that process pretty closely. And it was a great opportunity for you as the council to kind of flex that policy muscle. So now we're taking that policy and translating it into a set of amendments for our existing city code. You'll remember that we've amended the process with Candid Keast Collaborative to now amend our current city code and look at those amendments towards the fall of this year. And then after we go through this phase 2 process, those will evolve into our unified land use code. So I'm going to turn it over this evening first to Brett Keast, and he'll get us underway. And again, we're hopeful that we can get through most of this discussion, but if we need additional time, we'll make that accommodation.
Thank you, Kathleen.
If I may, this is Jerry again, Kathleen. We do have 90 minutes, so I don't mean to be rushing. So if we need 90 minutes, let's take 90 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Mayor.
Mayor and Council, good evening. Pleased to be with you tonight. As both Kathleen and Mark indicated, we've got quite a lot of material to cover, so we will try to move at a reasonable pace as we possibly can. As we've stated from the beginning, this has been an iterative process. So we are working back and forth between staff and members of the community, spending time on the ground, talking amongst consultant team members, having check-ins with council, with commission along the way, and making sure that we're trying to include all perspectives as we are developing this land use code. And right now, focused on the downtown building block, as you know. So what I'd like to do tonight is to cover a little ground of what we heard during the first Envision Studio, which certainly provided a foundation for the work that occurred between that studio and the studio number 2 that we had last evening. And then we'll also have some of the comments and observations and summaries from what we heard through Envision Studio number 2. I do want to say that both of these studios have been pretty well attended, and we have utilized polls, so we've been able to get bi-directional feedback. So it's not just a one-way presentation, but we're giving them opportunity to both vote on certain scenarios that we're presenting to them. And last night we had some open-ended questions. So we were able to get a little bit more specific feedback from them, which helped us to fill in some of the blanks. I do want to note, though, that these two studios are not the only source of input that we have. So we're trying to make this, an all-community effort, certainly open and invite anybody that wants to participate. And tonight we think is important to bring the council up to speed and to talk about some of the key points or areas that we need some guidance or direction. So if I can proceed to the next slide, Brian. So we had a series of images for the first meeting that we had with the public. And from those, we got a lot of feedback. And so essentially, these are the highlights of what we've learned. And we have utilized this as we are beginning to conceptualize the draft regulations for downtown. So the first of those was that context is important. I think we all generally know that. But when we get into the technical drafting and coding and writing dimensional standards, that really means something a little more different to us, of just making sure that any development or redevelopment or add-ons, infill development that might occur throughout the downtown building block area is appropriate within its context, meaning not only the character area, but also what's on either side of it. So that we can be sensitive to other uses of lesser scale or greater scale in how we treat the design of buildings and different building types and things of that nature. So that has really helped to inform the work that has been done to this point. In addition, we were showing buildings that were in line with what would be permitted today by the zoning ordinance. And the feedback that we got repeatedly that really emerged as a strong theme was that lower density and lower intensity is preferred over the opposite. Meaning that generally, smaller building scale, smaller building bulk, or breaking large buildings up into several smaller pieces seems to be more within the context of what people view for downtown. So again, that was something that we looked at as we were setting up some of the different building types and their design factors and dimensions that Nori will present to you here shortly. We also know that open space was noted as being highly desirable. So we are looking at that as to whether that's integrated within sites with some maybe front yard setbacks or something that would accommodate outdoor seating areas or plazas or other type of public space, or whether it is something that is provided in the public realm and by the public sector instead of by the private sector per se. Next slide, please. Pedestrian orientation, obviously you've got a terrific pedestrian environment along Main Street. The question was, how do we extend that through appropriate parts of other character areas throughout downtown? I think generally people agree that we want downtown to be interesting and inviting and safe for pedestrians and bicycles to move about, and for the people who live or work in the area to be able to walk to downtown, to restaurants or other types of services or offices as well. So we really look at establishing an interesting street edge. In other words, having buildings that front on the street and create transparency in the form of windows, having entrances that help to activate that street frontage. So Nori will talk to you about that. We did get some comments last night about that Nori will overview as well. And tying into the less density, less intensity is lower scale buildings. We were showing some 4 and I believe even 5-story buildings during the first Envision Studio, and generally people reacted less favorably to the larger scale buildings than they did the smaller scale buildings. So that has been dealt with in a number of different ways, not necessarily just, shortening all buildings, but looking at different design techniques that can be utilized to help reduce that, the apparent scale from the street and certainly from the pedestrian viewpoint. So you'll see that tonight as well. We want to be able to mix the new with the old. Obviously, we have a lot of buildings that are either a landmark or significant to the community that people recognize and identify with. So as we encounter new development or infill development or building additions, whatever that might be, to be able to do that in context and sensitively, but to be able to provide for new construction that's built in a way that blends in seamlessly and is respective of what's around it. The other thing that will be new to you is that what you have had as a separate set of design standards for downtown are being integrated and rolled into the Unified Land Use Code. This was done for a number of reasons. Primarily, it will be much easier for applicants to have everything included in one place. We're able to cross-reference the standards and make sure the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. It'll be easier for the administration of the ordinance. And so all of the physical traits from those design standards guidelines are being brought into Unified Land Use Code as definitive standards. And then we are looking at some of the remaining pieces to how they are integrated through other sections of the Unified Land Use Code. So you will probably recognize a lot of what are today your design standards that are woven into the fabric of the downtown, or what is emerging as the downtown standards. So as Kathleen indicated, that we decided before we started drafting that rather than drafting this in an entirely new online format, that particularly for downtown, that it might be more appropriate to work within the current regulations. And so the way that is happening is that we are sharing Google Docs, and the consultant team is drafting using Redline. We integrated all of the changes that staff had made through phase one, so those are reflected in there. And then we are making additional edits and additions as we are beginning to draft the regulations. There will be a pretty significant departure from what you're used to seeing. One of those will be the use of perspectives or three-dimensional graphics. We believe that a picture is truly worth 1,000 words, that they really help people to interpret and understand the regulations much better than just having a bunch of numbers in tables. So you will see that there are perspective illustrations that have letter designations that correspond to either photographs that help to depict the type of building or to the actual regulations. So when we get talking about, building setbacks and step backs and things like that, those are all keyed to the photographs. So you'll see on the right, furthest right, there'll be plan view perspectives that help you to understand setbacks and location of parking and access and pedestrian entry. And those, again, are all keyed to the standards that are found in the table below. So I think it's really important that we kind of set the tone or the perspective here as to this entire process. We've been before you before we really started drafting, but I think it's incumbent upon us to really talk about how this Unified Land Use Code is coming together and the methodology that is being used. So some of the images and standards that you're going to be shown tonight kind of reflect a myriad of legal precedents, of economic viability and feasibility considerations, and in some cases constraints, statements of public policy through ordinances that council's adopted and through adopted plans, along with industry best standards or best practices rather, that might be pertain to how these things are reasonably administered by staff and enforced, providing for consistency with building and health and safety codes, and even considering constructability. So these standards that you're going to see, there has been, a great deal of research and a great deal of experience and expertise that has been put into creating a code that can actually be built and reflect the type of outcomes that is reflected through the vision and through the comprehensive plan. So the underpinnings of these regulations are maybe more involved than a lot of people recognize. A lot of people may think this is, just an exercise of collecting opinion. And while opinions are important, there's certainly a place for them. They have to be considered against a variety of other factors. Some of those are the comprehensive plan, obviously, under the state statutes and the legislative declaration. A mandate for granting power of zoning is that zoning shall be made in accordance with the comprehensive plan. So this makes it very imperative that this ordinance ties back to the comprehensive plan. Obviously, there was a lot of work and effort and conversations that came to bringing the comprehensive plan to adoption. So much of what you will see tonight is rooted in that comprehensive plan. There's also growth scenarios in the plan that, reflect additional residents and additional housing units. And so the question before us is, how are those to be accommodated? In a largely built out community, what does that really mean? And then particularly for downtown, how might that be accommodated? And of course, all that contributes to, the long-term economic sustainability of the community, which we know is, very important and first and foremost on the minds of the folks that are sitting in the room tonight. And then, the zoning ordinance, right from state law, talks about, or the zoning statutes rather, that regulations shall be made with consideration to, among other things, the character of the district and the peculiar suitability for the particular uses. So that's really where we're drawing on this whole idea of character that's been talked about in the community for the last 2 years. And hopefully we'll be providing more meat to the bone in terms of what that really means as we get into this. And there's a whole slew of other things that are very important, from vested property rights to the creating of nonconformities. If we don't calibrate these standards correctly, we could create more problems than good by creating nonconformities and excess process that's frustrating and unnecessary and adds costs. So I just wanted to kind of set that tone that a lot of this begins with the plan, but there's a lot of other factors that are considered and built into this, that we need to make sure that this code is in service of these particular points. Next slide, Brian. So I think, this is a little bit about what we talked about, that there's a lot of different sources, and what I just spoke of, in addition to what we're seeing here on the slide, there's been a great deal of, technical merit and depth that's been put into this. Next slide. So these are the character areas. The study area for the downtown building block is highlighted in blue and outlined in red. And then you'll see each of the different character areas. These generally align with the comprehensive plan. So a lot of the future land use and character districts that are outlined in the plan are being brought through to the character districts for which there are regulations and standards being provided. So those include downtown mixed use, the transitional or the gateway into downtown, the downtown residential neighborhood, and then certainly Main Street. So we are creating a downtown zoning district, and you've had the central area district to this point. We think the DT district will replace the central area plan. It's intended to provide for a variety of different uses and building types, as it does today. We know that downtown, by its very nature, is typically more dense than elsewhere in the city, and intended to be, walkable, and buildings that are built to the street and parking's handled in different ways, either on street or tuck under parking or in structures or even underground. So downtown is unique, and so therefore the standards are drafted in such a way that make that unique as well. So in some of the districts, you'll have buildings that are built to the street, such as along Main Street, as well as in the mixed use district. As I said, parking can be provided in a number of different ways. So we are diving into that. We know that parking has been, on the higher side of some of the interests of comments that we've heard. And then landscaping. In some places it might be more formalized, such as along downtown Main Street, where you might have tree wells, whereas in neighborhood areas and others, it might be more informal within, front and side yards and rear yards and things of that nature. Next slide, Brian. We've had a lot of conversation, and I think where we're going is that, we feel like the density numbers and the intensity numbers that are in the current regulations, first of all, they don't work. And second of all, most people that deal with this ordinance don't really understand the difference between 15 and 25 units per acre. They generally understand that one's greater than the other, but they don't know really what that looks like on the ground. And floor area ratio is even harder to understand or conceptualize. So what we are proposing to do is to, instead of utilizing these more technical terms, is that we're proposing a series of different building types that will house different types of uses, residential, commercial, mixed use, and Nori will be showing you those as we get further into the presentation. We'll still have lot dimensions, lot areas, and lot widths. We're trying to be careful not to create non-conforming situations, as I just discussed. The land uses, staff has done a lot of work, and you have heard from them in terms of the phase 1 proposals for changes in land use. We'll be building on that as we're drafting these regulations. Parking we've talked about, landscaping we've talked about, and we've continued our work with creating a 3-dimensional computer model of the downtown area, where we have extruded the building footprints to their accurate heights. The limitations of the model don't allow us to put roof pitches on them, so they are flat, but they do represent the general building massing and relationships between buildings and streets and so forth. So we have taken models that have been built to reflect the standards and how they apply, and put them within that model to help show people what the outcomes of the downtown standards would be. We think this is absolutely essential, that words and numbers on paper don't mean much to most people. But if we're able to show those with graphics, and particularly show them within the context of the downtown built environment, that will really help them. This model will be something that will continue on after the code is adopted, and there will be a requirement for 3D models to be submitted for any proposed development in downtown, so they can be imported, and you'll be able to fly through that 3D model and look at it from different perspectives, both from a bird's eye view, from a street level view, and to provide the appropriate, evaluation of whether or not that is appropriate in the context of downtown. Next slide. So at this point, I'm going to transition the presentation to Nori. Nori is going to focus a little bit more in on the devil's in the details of talking about the different character areas and some of the proposed building types and how they apply. So Nori.
Good evening. This slide highlights some of the points that Brett has been making that specifically relate to the building standards. Some of the other categories that he's touched on, of course, have to do more with use and site design, but our focus has been on the buildings. And he's alluded to the idea that the standards would be tailored to different contexts, the 4 character areas mentioned, and also then calibrated for different building types, which I want to show you in a few minutes. The next slide explains how we are currently approaching the way in which the standards for buildings would be organized. And they would have basically 4 key components for the standards. One is a table of permitted building types in a character area, and I'll show you that shortly. This enables us to permit a variety of mix of building types in some areas and limit them more strictly in others that may be more sensitive and where a limited palette of building types would be appropriate. Those are tailored to the individual character areas, but they are prescriptive standards. And in order to build in some flexibility and allow for some alternative approaches, we also are building in what we're calling some menus of alternative techniques. They're clear enough that they can be administered easily, but it does give flexibility in responding to some of the requirements. And then there's a section on additional design standards for all the character areas. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute. In the next slide, you'll see that the as you move into an individual building type, that we're organizing that into these subsections. One is a description of that particular building type. I'll show you that. And then a table of standards that's organized into 4 subcategories, and these remain constant for all of the building types. The first one has to do with building placement and lot coverage. The second, building height and step backs. The third, building activation, and the fourth, form and orientation. Now, building height and step backs, we're discussing in terms of stories and the concept of stepping back upper portions to help reduce perceived scale while still accommodating a variety of new building types. Building activation, and will include topics that I'll be showing you that are related to a little bit finer grain ways of modulating the facade of a building to give it a pedestrian scale and to help it fit in with the traditions of downtown. And form and orientation have to do with the way in which entrances connect to the street, and in some cases actually building form is looked at. And then there is a category for additional building standards of a specific type, and this is a place where we can locate some of the material that is in the existing standards that doesn't necessarily fit into the table format that I'll be showing you. Now, given that, we do want to be able to build in some flexibility, as I mentioned, and the menus that we currently are drafted, and I'll show you a couple of those, are for ways in which to vary the mass of a building to help it appear to be more a composition of several smaller buildings, and the ways in which the facade may be better articulated. Now, in addition to those which are in the code, there also is some flexibility available for administrative discretion, where there's maybe some range to vary some of the numbers administratively, and then certainly before the Planning Commission. The character areas are derived somewhat from the comp plan, but also from the downtown design standards, which had a series of sub areas. And you will see some similarities, but some have been consolidated. And our ability to work at a building type level allows us to calibrate within those areas to pick up some of the nuances that the downtown design standards were attempting to accomplish. While I have this map up, I'll just briefly note, I mean, you should recognize the Main Street area. You see on the right on the blue with the label for Town Hall. And immediately below that is a rectangle, which is the downtown transition area. And then just above Main Street is the upside down U, which is the downtown neighborhood. And that generally reflects the remaining portions of sub-area 4 that still have a strong single family character in them. And then the remaining area is the downtown mixed use area, where a greater mix of building types is encouraged and is foreseen. On the next slide, you see the table I alluded to about permitted building types. The left-hand column shows the list of building types that we're working with at the moment. Those are organized into those that are exclusively residential in character and those that are non-residential and or that mix residential with other uses. There are then columns for the 4 different character areas, indicating with the P which of those building types would be permitted in that sub area, in that character area, and the dash indicating where a certain building type would not be permitted. What you can see is that for the more sensitive downtown neighborhood, that more traditional low-scale residential area, the palette is limited to residential that would be more compatible in that context. The mixed-use category obviously permits the widest range. Main Street permits the a wide range of commercial and mixed use and institutional building types, but not some of the lower density residential. And the transition area does also permit a wide range, but with some more restrictive limitations on form and setback. In the next slide, the 4 subcategories that you're going to see that I mentioned earlier are these 4. If we move into those, you will see that in the next slide that there is a standard palette of the way in which the standards for each building type is organized. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the mixed use building type, but each one of them has a definition and an illustration, photographic examples, and then graphic illustrations that are then linked to the table of the specific standards themselves. If we move in on the next slide for that first section, this is an example of the illustration of the mixed-use building type with some of its key features highlighted, a clearly identifiable entrance, a step back of upper floors, and a high degree of transparency at the street level to provide pedestrian interest are some of the key features. And then there is a narrative, a written description or definition of that building type that accompanies that. The next page includes those illustrations of building that are real examples of that kind of a building type. These particular ones received high marks in the first workshop as being ones that people felt would be compatible in the downtown. We'll continue to edit the images as the specifics of the standards change to be certain that they are representative of what the standards are stating. The next section is the graphics that are setting up a visual definition of some of the standards. And so in each of these cases, you see some letters. If you look at the upper right, the larger illustration on the right, you'll see that item C is missing, and as is D. That doesn't mean they aren't going to be in the tables that you see. It's just that some of them don't necessarily lend themselves to being illustrated graphically. If we look to the site plan, you will see that there are a series of definitions here that are illustrated. And one that's important for the standards in particular is item A, and that is a build-to zone. Now, in some cases, that's a very narrow zone. For example, in Main Street, a high percentage of the primary front of the building should be right at the sidewalk edge, but with perhaps a little bit of flexibility for an active use space. But in other areas, particularly those that are more residential in nature, there's a wider range for that build-to zone. If we look at the next slide, this shows you the table that is linked to that site plan. And so here, that primary build-to zone is line A, and you can see how those standards apply for the mixed-use building type to the 4 different neighborhoods, the 4 different character areas. The downtown neighborhood, where the mixed-use building isn't permitted, of course, has not applicable. But for the others, you can see the degree of setback being from 0 to 10 feet in the mixed-use character area, 0 to 5 feet in the Main Street character area, and 15 to 30 feet in the transition. Now, that said, that doesn't say that you could place an entire building front back 5 feet or 15 feet, if you were, in one of those zones. Only a certain percentage could be set back that degree. So those are some of the finer grain aspects that we won't get into tonight, but I just wanted to mention. If we look at the next slide, this one has to do with building height and step backs. Now, the zoning districts will continue to address overall building height in terms of feet, but here we're addressing them in terms of the number of stories. And the idea of the step back is the one that is particularly important for most of the districts that include commercial and mixed use buildings. There is a limit of a 2-story height at the street edge, with upper portions being required to be set back. And that would help to reduce the perceived scale from the street while still accommodating more development than you could within just, say, a 2-story building. On the next slide, you will see the illustrations for the activation elements. Now, these are the ones that have to do with maximum wall length and the maximum amount of blank wall before which you have to do something to provide visual interest to that blank wall, and there will be a menu for options on how to deal with that. But also establishing the concept of modules and facade width that are more in keeping with the traditional building widths in the downtown area. So this is addressing the concept that you can have a larger building that has varied massing as well as articulation in a way that helps to reduce perceived scale. And then also it's highlighting the measures for transparency, the percentage of glass to solid wall. And for the commercial retail area, the first floor has a high degree of transparency requirement, particularly for the mixed-use building type. Now, I mentioned the idea that there would be some flexibility in terms of some of the menus for design. One of those is for wall articulation. These are generally small scale variations in the way in which a larger building is designed. So here you have an example of a larger building with accent lines that begin to break it up into smaller modules, into smaller pieces. The traditional example of that would be moldings and cornices on historic buildings, but they can be interpreted in contemporary ways for modern buildings as well. Another option is wall offsets. These are minor notches or changes in the wall plane that help to, again, define different building widths or divide a building into smaller widths that are modular, that reflect those traditional scale buildings for downtown. Other approaches are changes in material and color that, again, are done in a way, though, that express modules, not just a hodgepodge mashup of material. And so the standards are going to be fairly clear about how to use that tool. And other finer grained tools for techniques for articulation are the way in which canopies and awnings might be spaced, or in which a building is organized into what's considered a base, a middle, and a cap that helps to provide visual variety rather than just looking like it's been vertically extruded up to an unlimited height. The other menu that we're working with is a more substantial variation of massing as opposed to surface treatment. This includes literally stepping down one of those modules of floor. That might be to create a rooftop deck or terrace or active use area, but it does help to break up the overall mass of a building. Another option is to inset one of those modules substantially to create an active amenity space for the street. And the third one is the upper level step back that is mandated within that build-to zone in some of these areas. And then another one that is particularly of interest is the idea of stepping down at the end of a building when the building might abut what we're defining as a sensitive edge. And that would be when it abuts a landmark structure or the historic district or a low intensity neighborhood, such as the downtown neighborhood character area. And so that helps us to assure that buildings along those edges can respond more sensitively to their setting. Now, I wanted to just show you some models of some of the other building types and highlighting some of the key requirements that we're drafting at this stage into those different character areas. We're going to look at three of them: Main Street, the neighborhood, the downtown neighborhood, and the transition character area. The downtown neighborhood, again, permits a more limited list of low and moderate intensity residential building types. And it basically is along Curtis, extending over to Prince, and running essentially from Powers up to Crestline. In the next slide, you see 3 of the building types illustrated. Now, each of them is illustrated in the code, and these are some of the highlighted standards. There are, of course, several others that we're working on, but these are the beginning standards for those 3 building types. And a key requirement here, in particular for the townhomes, is that there be a 1-story element in that front setback area. That could be a porch or a 1-story wing to a building, but to help bring down the scale to be one that is more in keeping with traditions, and also includes sloping roof forms to be more compatible and consistent. That's illustrated on the next slide, where some other key standards are highlighted as well. So this is a change from some of the products that we've seen out recently that are townhomes, but don't do as good a job of connecting to the street or of reducing scale. The next building type is that for the multiplex. These are buildings that include from 3 to 6 individual residential units. And they also have some articulation requirements and some front yard setback requirements. A clear entry definition linking to the street is important. And in this case, a sidewall offset reflecting that modulation technique, dividing it into wall links that are more similar to the wall links that one sees in the traditional single family residential buildings in the area. Moving to the Main Street character area, and of course it is the properties bounding Main Street essentially, and the list of building types that would be permitted there. The next slide illustrates a couple of the examples of the building types. We've already seen mixed use up close as the example of the overall organization. A cousin is the commercial building type, which is similar in many respects, and certainly it is in terms of the step back requirements, but the transparency requirements for upper floors will be somewhat different because of the functional needs of that particular kind of a building form. The up close of the mixed use example again shows the 2-story maximum. Now this one illustrates a 3-story maximum building, and it also illustrates that concept over in the left portion of the building of it being limited to 2 stories, because the assumption in this particular case is that is abutting one of those sensitive edges. Now, at present, the draft code assumes a 4-story limit as well, but that's not illustrated here, but there's some limits also that would be imposed on the 4th floor. Now, the transition area is one that we heard from the competency plan and from the earlier workshops that people are very concerned about, because it still has a mix of its single family residential character, and yet the vision is that it will include and accommodate a wider range of building types and uses, if you will. And so the challenge here is how to reference those design traditions in new buildings while accommodating these new building types. And the models here in the next page make use of some of the same ones that are illustrated elsewhere, but it do introduce in some cases a requirement for a sloping roof form to help be more in keeping with the traditions of the area. And here you see a new building form being illustrated, that of the apartment building type. But again, stepping down to 2 stories as it moves closer to the street. Looking at that one a little bit more closely, it also includes that sloping roof element here, a hip roof for the upper portion of the building to reference those traditions.
Hey, Nori.
Yes.
if I can interrupt, I thought we might get some feedback. I probably should have done this a few slides ago to get started, but on the policy questions that were laid out for the downtown transition area, do you have those in front of you, Nori?
It'll take me a minute to pull them up.
Okay, well, while you're doing that, there were a couple of questions that are posed for which we were looking for some input. Generally for this area, what we heard primarily through the meeting last night, through some of the written comments, was just a concern for overall scale. So I guess that would be a question for the council. If the image that is shown on the screen, if you feel like that it is, broken up and articulated enough with building modules and different heights and building wall step-ins, as well as the pitched roof. When you look at this from a bird's eye view, it appears as greater scale. But of course, nobody's going to be looking at it from this perspective. So when you're looking at it from a ground perspective, it's going to appear much different than it does here, where you can see, the apparent scale of the entire building. So I'd like to get a little bit of feedback from council as to what your perspectives. And again, this is in the transition area, which is that area of entering from the west along Alamo Street. And Nori, if you wanted to add anything before council.
No, that's good. I'm still, for some reason, it's not showing up where I'm supposed to have it. Brian, do you have it there? I know we had it up earlier.
Yeah, Brian, you might just email it to him. So,
okay.
I'll email it to you, Nor.
Okay.
Mayor and council, if you can give us any thoughts that you have on that question.
Yeah, Tyler, could you pull up all council so I can see the members, please? There we go. Thank you. All right, we'll start some questioning. So, Councilmember Elrod.
I think I just lost you guys, but I'll talk. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay. Actually, I was going to suggest, given how far along we are in the presentation, to just finish up the presentation and then come back. Because I think towards the end of this presentation, we also have a view of what we've heard from some of the studios. So I may actually suggest, if others agree, that we just continue through the presentation and then come back and look at each of the policy questions section by section.
Council, do we have any questions at this time? It does look like we have.
I have a feeling that the conversation will be quite robust. And so we might as well finish the presentation.
Thank you. I agree.
I'm good for that. Okay. Yes. If we could, Brett, and Nori, if we could do the presentation to the end.
Okay, we'll do.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, Brian, yeah, let's see what's happened here. We've lost the. There we go. All right, great.
So, Nori, just for time perspective, we are about 55 or 50 minutes into the 90-minute.
Okay. So what might this develop, what might downtown look like if these standards are put into place? We've been working with staff to generate a series of images in 3D in the urban model that will be used to review projects that Brett alluded to earlier. And there are three images here that I want to show you real quickly. The first one is a view from the south, looking north. At the bottom of the screen is Church Avenue. And you see the large rectangle donut up in the upper right-hand corner, which is the Art Center, just to orient you a little bit. And the roofs with the light gray are existing buildings, and the roofs with dark gray are new buildings. Now, we randomly selected some sites. Don't take this as a proposal or an expectation for development by any means, but we wanted to do a mix of old and new, assuming that a certain amount of downtown would remain stable while other areas would be redeveloping. So here you see a mix of mixed use buildings and commercial buildings down in the lower portion of the screen. At the upper portion is Alamo, running left to right, where some apartments and some smaller mixed use buildings and townhouses have been introduced. The next image moves farther north, and it has Main Street in the bottom image. You see the strong alignment of the existing buildings along Main Street itself, with some newer potential infill buildings behind. And then moving up Curtis, you see a mix of some new townhouses and of those multiplex apartments being introduced there as well. And then finally, an overview. And so this is sort of showing in how the modulation and articulation of building forms would relate to the overall existing context of downtown. Now, lastly are the polling results from last night. We showed those same standards for the individual character areas, and people were able to vote as to whether they felt the approach to the standards was appropriate or whether they disagreed with that. And you will see here for the downtown neighborhood, high percentage agreeing, relatively high percentage agreeing somewhat, and then dropping down to a small number disagreeing. Now, these don't add up to 100% because about 25% of the people attending did not vote generally on any of the questions, and that's because some of them were observers, staff, consultants, but also potentially people who just simply weren't voting. But you can see that in general, pretty strong support for the direction. In the next slide, you see then some written comments, and this is a selection of some of them, both pro and con. Someone liking the tables, others still thinking the massing is too much for the downtown neighborhood, others feeling that the balance was right, liking that concept of a one-story feel along the street edge, some comments about density, which we weren't addressing, but and then also being certain that the step backs are actually in the right location to be effective. And those are some fine-grained ideas that we can think about. The next character area was for the mixed-use character area. Here again, a large percentage agreeing with the direction. And when you look at those that agree and somewhat agree, it's again the majority of those participating. And then those disagreeing in a smaller number. That's not to discount those, though. Of course, we want to get a better understanding of why that is, and we'll be looking at all of the individual responses as well to get a better sense of that. But if you look at the next slide, you'll see some of those comments. Appreciating the step-down approach, but still feeling 4 stories is too much. A concern that the step back actually would affect affordability, and that the design character might lead to a wedding cake effect, although we do have some finer grain standards that can help to prevent that from happening. Liking the idea of addressing the sensitive edge and feeling that even greater setbacks are needed. So there's a mix of opinion there that comes forth. In the next character area, for the transition area, again, a high level of support, less so affirmatively agreeing outright, but when combined with those who somewhat agree, still a very high number, and then again dropping down. But there is an increase here in the somewhat disagree category from some of the other character areas, and that again I think tells us we've still got some homework to do in terms of getting that balance between respecting the traditional character and accommodating new development. Some of the written comments show, I think, at least two very different viewpoints about this area. Some feeling that definitely more density is appropriate in the southern portion. Others not feeling that it is well enough defined and maybe could be combined, and that's maybe not quite understanding what the objective there is. But again, others feeling that the examples are still too big. So a mix of opinions there. And then finally, for the Main Street character area, a high percentage agreeing on the approach. And again, when you combine agree and somewhat agree, one of the strongest responses, with though still a number that is noteworthy who still have concerns. Now, the written comments may indicate some of the reasons for that. That is on the next slide. That is that some are concerned that there will be this wedding cake effect. And others, though, feeling that 3 stories is really the limit rather than 4 that should be considered. While others were suggesting that perhaps you could have taller buildings in selected locations within the character area. So those are some of the general discussion comments on the specific character areas. And Brett, you were the one monitoring the open discussion. At the end of the workshop, people were able to just write in some general comments. And I remember your reading some last night. In particular, people being very excited about the computer model and how it would help people to visualize potential impacts of development in the downtown. Do you have some of the others that you wanted to mention?
Well, I just say that generally, as you just showed, that we felt like the vast majority of people were in agreement with the approach that's been taken. As we expected, there are some, diverging opinions. And of course, perhaps council can kind of help to, give us specific guidance so we know how to draft the regulations. Those were primarily the idea of 4-story. We believe that using the step backs and being able to step down to transition between different building types or heights or something is an appropriate way to deal with that. As I said, it's a little bit deceiving because when we show these graphics, we showed a bird's eye view that nobody's going to see. Next time we do this, we'll probably provide more street level views so you get a more realistic sense of scale. And even some of the photographs we show, you can see how the step backs really, the upper stories disappear from you driving down a street or walking down a street. So to us, we feel like we could pretty easily accommodate 4 stories as long as we apply those design techniques so that we're not dwarfing a street or entirely enclosing or shading a street by having 4 stories right at the street edge. Let me see, was there anything else, Kathleen or Brian or Nori, that stuck out to you on the open discussion items?
I think that was some of the key ones. And now, thanks for forwarding back again. I don't know how many copies I have now of these policy questions, but at least I've got one in front of me now. And I believe council got them ahead of time. So do you want me to lead those questions?
Yeah, I think the best, probably the most time-sensitive way to do it is to take them by category, beginning with general and then working through neighborhood, downtown mixed use, so forth and so on. And just so we provide context, I would like Nori to provide a little more detail as to relative to these questions, how the regulations are handling these today. So they're not just a volley around, open-ended discussion, but to try to narrow the focus so that we get good guidance from council. So Nori, you might just put a little more meat on the bone to these, if you would, please.
Sure,
and then
sure.
plenty of time for Kevin.
So the first one is the general question of in which sub areas of downtown should buildings be built to the street? The way we're headed in the draft right now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that a high percentage of the building front in the Main Street character area would be required to be built right at the sidewalk edge. There'd be a little bit of wiggle room for an active outdoor space, but it would have to be a limited percentage of the length of the wall. A similar concept would apply in the mixed use area, but it would get a little bit more flexible. It still would promote buildings being at the street edge primarily, but allowing for a little bit more setback for some larger outdoor spaces or other kinds of activities. And neither of those is parking allowed in front or anything like that. It has to be an active space. The residential neighborhood, the downtown neighborhood, we are recommending or drafting at the moment a substantial residential setback that is in keeping with the traditions of the area. So it's, I think, a 10-foot to 20-foot range. The 10 foot's a little bit closer than traditional, but still requiring more yard, and it is required to be landscape yard, and again, in the downtown neighborhood. And the transition area is again the one where there would be a little bit more flexibility in setbacks so that you could have buildings setback, and preference would be in line with some of the traditional residential buildings, but it does permit mixed use buildings that come up to the street edge. So that would, yeah.
We hesitate there, just kind of tackle that first, and then we can talk about building materials and color.
Yep.
So any perspectives from council, any strong opinions other than what Nori laid out?
I have a comment. This is Karina. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead, please.
I'm sure that it applies to this particular question. The boundaries of the downtown neighborhood versus the downtown mixed use, it kind of, like you called it, an upside down U. And Nevada Place is what's kind of throwing that off. So that particular area that's called mixed use between the Main Street, yeah, if you can go to the map. So for me, I feel like this needs to be addressed, perhaps.
Past it.
Right here. No, right here. So that area that is mixed use, that is kind of wedged in between Main Street neighborhood and downtown neighborhood, to me, that even just given where it is geographically, to me is more of a transitional area. So I would want to make a recommendation for us to actually consider that transitional, because we do have some houses there. We have different forms. I do understand. I believe the reason you called it mixed use is because we do have Nevada Place, and that's an apartment building, but maybe it shouldn't have been. So I would strongly suggest that we consider that little kind of weird shape, I guess, in between Main Street and downtown neighborhood to be transitional instead of mixed use.
Okay, but we're taking notes as we go here, so we can try to get as many.
Yeah, that's it.
And Tyler, can you pull up the council? I can't see the council and who has questions. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Karina, did you get a response whether you were looking for?
I wasn't seeking a response. I was just giving some.
Making your comment. Okay, cool. Scott, you had a question?
Yeah, I heard during the presentation that, or I guess I saw it on one of the slides, that a permitted building type on Main Street would be a parking structure. And that seems problematic to me. Another comment I would want to make is, and hopefully we'll get to this discussion at some point, but I just want to point out again, my my opinion that, in this conversation about character, we're making our treatment of the natural world in the downtown area a total afterthought, right? We look at the depiction of landscaping on these 3D models, and it's literally nothing, right? But of course, on the one hand, landscaping is a critical input when it comes to character, and on the other hand, it's a crucial aspect of what we need to achieve with the ULUC is thinking through what we want our natural environment to be, not just in the downtown, but throughout the city.
Good. Pam, I'm sorry.
I'll tackle that last one if we can real quick. So tonight primarily was focused on, building forms and types and things of that nature, but there will be a section on landscape as we talked about. Part of that will be preserving the existing tree canopy. Part of that will be providing for landscaping. And of course, in different character areas that may be handled in different ways or will need to be handled in different ways. So there will be a section for downtown that will address what we're referring to as greenscape. We just didn't go over that tonight, but I appreciate that comment. And I think, Nori, probably if I'm correct, the parking structure, it's permitted in the Main Street district, but not on Main Street itself.
With the design standards that we're drafting for it, you couldn't physically do it on Main Street. It will require an active wrap of other uses at the street level, and upper levels have to have architectural treatment so that it fits in more as a building rather than it won't be an exposed parking structure any place the way the standards are being drafted for it right now.
Thank you. Pam?
And with respect to the downtown area built to the street, I think the Main Street, that makes a whole lot of sense. But when you start talking about the mixed use and give flexibility, all of these examples seem to be too dense, cover too much of the lot line, too intense, too dense. And I would like to see not giving flexibility, because my perception is that developers will cover every square area they can and find every loophole, unfortunately. And I would like to see us kind of close those loopholes and not give flexibility with the intent that people will do something that doesn't give them more dollars per square inch.
That was it. Kelly or Carol, do you have anything yet? And Patrick? No, Kelly has no question. Carol, do you have a question? Oh. Gonna try your mute. There we go. All right, we can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Unmute. How's that?
There we go. There we go.
There we go. Yes, I agree with Pam very much. The more specific we can be, close all the loopholes.
Okay, Patrick, did you have a question this time? Okay, I do have one before we go around second questions here. And I concur with Pam as well. The density, I find it a bit shocking. Also, I noticed on the downtown now has a variety of roof types, but it seemed like at least on the models that you were showing us, it was primarily, maybe it was more of the hip type roofs. We're leaving room for a variety of roofs, I'm hoping, not just one type of style.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. Second round, Scott.
Yeah, I guess this is a question for Brett and Nori, more than a comment. I guess I really don't know the answer to this. I'm a little concerned that our emphasis on character, which I absolutely think is critical. We have to protect the character of the downtown. I'm a little concerned though that there's a fine line between character and homogeneity. And I just want to make sure that the sort of menu of options that developers have to choose from, it doesn't force a kind of uniformity in the downtown. I'm picturing transparent suburban neighborhood where when it was built, the buyers could choose from sort of one of 5 home design types, right? And that doesn't create character, it just creates the suburbs, right? So I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Nora, you want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, that is why we are working on this series of menus. And in some cases, the requirement is you must have 2 of those or 1 of those and a combination of them to be certain that there is a mix and that variation appears to be authentic, because what we, and I think all of us are seeing across the country right now is where you don't understand how to divide a building into logical subcomponents, you end up with a superficial pastiche, and it could be, fake styles, or it could be silly changes in materials or little offsets, but it still reads as one continuing mass. So the objective here is to deal with massing, not with style, to accommodate a variety of stylistic options and also a variety of roof forms, as was alluded to earlier. So it's stopping short of some of the kinds of standards that could lead to a cookie cutter kind of response. There's still a range of flexibility here. But, it is also limiting form to some extent.
All right, thank you. Karina, do you have a second round question yet? Go ahead, Karina.
Two comments. So the first, the massing and the density, I definitely had that reaction as well, that there just seems to be a lot more of that, in part because the mixed use was such a big part of the downtown area where the greatest amount of massing can occur. You spoke, I heard you on Monday talk about 125 feet of length. So the length contributes to mass and density as much as the height does. So can you talk a little bit about, I think the number was 125. What does 125 look like? Do we have it downtown now to give us a sense? And did that vary by neighborhood or not? I don't remember. So that's the first question.
It will vary by neighborhood. 125 feet is a little more than half a block width. And so we purposely set it at something that would be less than a full block to avoid some of those kinds of projects that we had heard negative comments about that were much longer in their length.
And so in what neighborhoods would 125 not apply?
In the transition and obviously in the downtown neighborhood, it's a much more limited width.
Great. Pam, you had a second question, another question?
Yes, in looking at, we're talking about roofs and setbacks, I would advocate that we stick with the 1-story in the surrounding areas and then setbacks, and 2-story on Main Street, and not go up to 4 and 5 stories. Those kind of buildings are appropriate in other areas of Littleton, but not in our historic downtown where we have the smaller buildings and we're trying to maintain character, whatever's left of it, and provide more transition. I was walking around downtown today and the big buildings next to the small buildings just don't seem to fit. And right up to the front next to a small building that has a yard, just looks so out of place. And if we could do a better job of transitioning, I think we can maintain our look and feel of our area. So that's what I would advocate.
All right, good. Let's see, Carol, did you have a question, or Kelly or Patrick? I'm trying to go around the horn for everybody here.
I do not have anything more.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Kelly?
Sorry. So I kind of want to go back to the history of downtown Littleton. I mean, downtown Littleton, even in the 1800s, was the urban center of our community. And there were more people living in downtown Littleton than anywhere else in the community. And so I'm glad that Rick Cronenberger sent out that survey about what is your definition of character, because I think everybody's going to have a different perception about it. And what downtown Littleton looks like today doesn't even mirror what it looked like when I first moved here in 2000, nor did it look like what it looked like in the 50s, and so on and so on. And so I think, my concern is, and I kind of echo Scott's sentiments with uniformity, is in keeping with whatever the character is of downtown, but adding to that architecture, adding to that character going forward. I personally don't have a problem with 3- and 4-story buildings on Main Street. I did look, some of those buildings today, they did a nice job of either putting in new ones or they built on top of existing ones that are not necessarily historic buildings. And with the setbacks, you really couldn't tell unless you were far away, that's what it was. I know it would benefit, the merchants, the restaurants, the viability, the excitement of our downtown to bring in that diversity. So my concern is, yes, definitely uniformity, us looking like everything's almost the same or pretty much the same. That's just going to be another urban sprawl. That's my concern.
Thank you. Patrick, did you have any questions or comments at this point? Cool. I have one then before we go to the next round here then. So the fenestration was good. I like it how you're leaving lots of windows, not blank walls. Even with a massive building though, the materials is real important. It's going to be siding. That's not going to look so good. Are you going into that depth yet, Brett or Nori?
That's actually one of our questions here was about limiting primary materials by building type. And we have begun to do that because there is some language in the existing design standards that allude to that. It references the fact that along Main Street, more traditional building materials should be predominant. And so we are planning on having a palette of building materials and indicating which of those are appropriate as primary building materials tailored to the different character areas. So yes, in a Main Street context, it would be masonry as a predominant material, which could be brick, stone, or similar kinds of materials. In the downtown neighborhood, of course, a lap siding material could be quite compatible.
Okay, thank you. We're going another round of questions, Scott.
So the illustration seemed to assume infill on a single lot, but right now the city still allows lot consolidation, and my hope is that issue comes before council as part of this conversation about character. But what is the kind of effect of if you take the maximum allowed massing on a single lot and you multiply it by 2, it seems like that's going to be contrary to the character of the area. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's one of the reasons for setting an actual limit on the width of certain buildings by type across the street front. The question of lot consolidation is a different category for Brett to comment on, but that in of itself will require some spacing, even of some of the multifamily building types. So that you wouldn't have the in the downtown neighborhood, you would not have that continuous row that certainly has happened in a couple of projects.
Thank you. Pam.
I'd like to address a couple different things. First of all, I agree with Scott about lot consolidation, and if we do it by limitation of the size of the building, that works. I think that would help with density and keep things smaller. So I agree with that. Some perspective on where Littleton's been. Think about it. We were formed in 1890. There was 245 people. It was a farming community. There was a main street that Richard Little helped formulate, and then the buildings on the side where people, like on Alamo Street, where people lived. The period of focus, and I'm not exactly correct, but it's somewhere supposed to be the turn of the century. We're trying to keep that kind of flavor into the early 40s, maybe. And I understand the concern about uniformity because we don't want cookie cutters. But if we've seen what's been built on Main Street in terms of additions made, Tavern, Adelita's, the View House, they've all been different, very different kinds of buildings and how they interpret it, still keeping the one story. Tavern is one story. Adelita's has the step back and the View House. So I think it can be done with our experts keeping the intention without dictating so it comes across uniform.
Okay, thank you. Karina, did you have another one? Then back to Scott.
Yeah. One of the kind of principles in how you came up with some of these recommendations was to respect what's there. And respect what's there to a great degree is specifically some of our historical properties, and kind of irrelevant of whether they're under historic preservation or not. So my concern is, unless we make a maybe stronger or firmer commitment to historic conservation, we're designing for something we hope will continue to be there, but may not. So I think I don't know if it belongs here, but I really think we have to have a stronger conversation on historic. I'll use conservation to not use the P word, because otherwise we're designing for something that may not be there, 5-10 years down the road, and we've kind of compromised the intent and essence of our approach there.
Yep, good comment. Yeah, Scott?
Yeah, this is probably a totally random thought, but it does matter to me. I know we're talking about sloped roof forms in certain parts of the city. I'd like a developer to have the option to do a flat roof so long as there's a rooftop garden in those areas. I think that could be a tremendous addition to the character of our downtown. So just a thought.
All right, cool. Thank you, Scott. Council, did Carol, Kelly, or Patrick have anything else?
I do not.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like Pam has one.
Oh, I saw something.
That's okay.
I think the intent of the roof, after listening to Planning Commission's deep discussion on slope of 15 versus 13, etc., is to try to get rid of the boxy feel of the lot line to lot line, no open space, building that is less desirable than something that has more interest. And they came up with some ways to make it less uniform and to give the developer and architect more leeway.
Yeah, and if I can jump in, another detail that I didn't share with you is that in those areas where a sloping roof form is required, it's only for a percentage of the footprint of the building, not 100% necessarily. So there is that ability to have a flat roof portion.
Great, great.
The last thing I'd like, if I could,
sure,
is that we are at the same time here. There's a lot of balls in the air and a lot of things that are at play, and we are currently working with your economic consultant to basically evaluate what's on the table or what's being discussed now for downtown from a perspective of economic viability and feasibility of some of these projects. So the conversation is ongoing. We're coordinating with them as they are starting to build this model. I think that's going to be an important consideration that we'll have to circle back around on. It's just to consider those points. And the last thing that I'd say is just keeping in perspective what is permitted by the regulations today. I think we all agree that the regulations that are in the books today have not delivered the types of products that we prefer. So we feel good and confident that the types of regulations that we're doing are going to take us a long way down the road toward delivering what downtown is envisioned to be. And so with your input and the input of others, we can kind of continue to tweak and calibrate to get standards that we feel are as close as they can be. So
great. Scott, I think you had another question there.
I know another conversation that is coming council's way is how to handle parking downtown, and I wonder how that marries with this sort of conversation about building character types in the downtown. Because obviously, you could have a beautiful building right next to a scrape that's just a parking lot. And sort of what are some early thoughts from Brett and Nori about how we include parking in this conversation we're having?
And if you could make it kind of a short answer, because we have a couple of reports to get yet before 10 o'clock, which is our witching hour.
Well, generally, we're kind of looking at all the parking options, things that are being done across the country in downtowns. Probably the most important thing with parking for the character downtown is surface parking and its location relative to streets and adjacent properties. So we'll be looking at, of course, on-street parking, as well as tuck-under parking, which you have some of today. Parking structures, obviously, they come at a big cost and usually maybe a public-private partnership or done publicly. So that could be in the mix, but we don't want to necessarily absolutely count on that. And then also thinking about, pedestrian walkability as well as bicycling, how transit plays into this. So there's just a lot of different variations. We've started into this conversation. We haven't gotten too far yet that I can really start giving you more specifics. But yes, we're aware that parking is a land hog. So it can dominate the character of an area if you allow it to. We've seen some of that in downtown with surface parking lots and building in the front. And that's why we're talking about building edges and how we deal with and where we deal with parking and how much.
But thank you, Brett and Nori, very much. Good information. Hopefully you got some good information from us as well.
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
But I think Karina has one more question, and then Pam, and we're going to have to wrap it up here eventually.
My question is a matter of process. So you do have a list of policy questions. Do you want us to just kind of email and comment on these?
That would be wonderful, actually.
Thank you.
Well, I was going to suggest, we just barely scratched the surface, and the collective ideas were very good. Can we have another session on this to finish up? Do we have time? Mark?
Great. Let's hear from our city manager.
Yes, Mayor and Council. I think that we've already had some preliminary conversation here at the staff level, having another conversation. I wasn't sure we're really going to get through all this here this evening. So I would suggest that on these policy questions, if you want to send us some written comments here, and then I'll huddle up with Brett, Kathleen, and others, Nori, and we'll just figure out what's the best next opportunity here to get before council. Looking at our tentative calendar here in the next several weeks, I think we do have some flexibility.
So you want us to write, and we're going to have another discussion.
I would suggest that as a way to be more efficient.
Great. That's good. I think we're almost at 10 o'clock, so I do want to leave a couple minutes for our staff reports. Thank you guys very much. We really appreciate all your whole staff for what you do for us. All right. Thank you. All right. I'm just going to get to the city manager report.
Actually, Mayor, I really don't have anything more. I covered that in the regular meeting here. Unless there's some questions here from council, but other than that, I'm well caught up.
All right. Hey, Reed, you still with us?
Of course. Yeah, I don't have necessarily anything else to add other than Sorry, Tyler has now given me permission to put my video on. Other than I have sent to council a list of the Governor Polis's regulations, proposed regulations for restaurants, which they're going to be taking comment on over the next several days before they finalize those, hopefully on Monday or Tuesday. Additionally, I have contacted community development. We're going to get those out to the general business community so they have an opportunity to weigh in. Other than that, I don't have anything further.
And I think they are considered just the draft guidelines.
It's just a draft.
Yeah, cool. All right. With that, council, we do have our next meeting is Tuesday, the 26th. It is a study session, and it's probably going to be at least a couple hours. So unless we add anything to it, and if there's anything else, council? All right, then let's adjourn. It is 9:57. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.